Councilmember Danuski?
Here.
Councilmember Herbig?
Here.
Councilmember Curtis?
Here.
Councilmember Sperry?
Here.
Councilmember Smith?
Here.
Deputy Mayor Van Ness?
Excused.
Mayor Baker?
Here.
Thank you.
If you'll stand and join me in the flag salute. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God,
indivisible,
with liberty and justice for all.
Next item on the agenda is the approval of the agenda. If there are no objections, the agenda will stand approved as written. Next item on the agenda is citizen comments. This is an opportunity to express your views and on interest in the city and the community. And if you could please limit your comments to 3 minutes. Clerk, please call the first person.
There's no one signed up.
Okay. If nobody has any comments, next item on the agenda is the consent agenda. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all of those in favor of approving the consent agenda say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Consent agenda stands approved unanimously. Next item on the agenda is public hearing. Proposed budget amendments to the 2015-16 biennial budget. Ms. Gregory.
Good evening. Thank you, Mayor Baker. Good evening, council members. This is still 2016, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, in 15, right?
It's just we're so used
Kinda
to
going
seeing the other
backwards.
budget.
Well, it's the current period.
Okay, fine. We've been working with 17 and 18, and for you to come
I
out
know
with
you-
15 and 16 threw me for a curve.
Well, you threw me for a curve when you shot me that look. No, this is the final budget amendment for the current biennium, 2015-16. And I would like to take you through the recommended adjustments right now. So this is, this is a public hearing on those budget amendments and an opportunity for discussion and questions. The budget amendments would be brought back to you on December 12th, prior to the close of the year, before we end the year and close the year, the same night that we would adopt the 2017-18 budget.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So as I tried to explain, prior to closing the current 2015-16 budget period, we need to do some housekeeping. We need to ensure that expenditures do not exceed legally adopted budgets in any of our funds. We need to look for and adjust for previously approved council actions or direction since the mid-biennial review period adjustments, and that was in November of 2015. And recognize that there have been some unanticipated increases in certain expenditures as well as some better than expected revenues. Overall, the general fund revenues, which are tied to development, continue to remain strong throughout 2016 as they did in 2015. But there are several expenditure areas that exceeded their established budget. And in the agenda bill that's in your packet, there's more explanation about the budget adjustments than what is provided on these slides. So feel free to refer to that as well as any explanation that I can offer. So first, we'd like to recommend some adjustments to the revenue accounts, starting with $127,000 increase in property tax revenues. When we prepared our property tax revenue budgets back in 2014, for the years 15 and 16, we were conservative in our estimates of the new construction impact on the tax rolls. Well, it was very, very favorable. In fact, 2016 had the highest new construction going on the tax rolls in the city's history, except for 2009. So it was a really excellent year. We'd also like to recognize an additional $300,000 increase in our sales tax revenues over our budget. $200,000 in water sewer franchise fees. Now, you know that the water sewer franchise fees were a relatively new revenue source, and we didn't have a lot of history on that, so we were conservative in our budgeting. But it appears that we'll end this biennium with about $200,000 more than we had budgeted for. Also, there is a likelihood that the building permit revenue will show an increase of about $200,000 better than budget. And there's also included a reimbursement for an EIS study on the St. Edward Seminary of $150,000. This isn't actually a revenue source, but it's a reimbursement of an expenditure that does affect the bottom line, so I wanted to call it out separately. In the expenditure category, there are $1,328,000 worth of expenditures recommended. $260,000 of that increase would be in the legal budget, and as we discussed the legal budget earlier this month, we've had code enforcement issues, appeals, one-time legal matters that have really driven up those costs. So we're providing $260,000 more in that appropriation. $50,000 increase in liability insurance for our WCIA costs over the 2-year period. $98,000 for the Tyler Technologies financial software that was approved earlier this year, but we had not yet established a budget line item appropriation for that. $84,000 over the 2 years for increase in district court costs. $75,000 is what we budgeted for the public works service analysis, although some of this I think will carry over into 2017, and I believe Jennifer counted for that in her budget. $35,000 for the development services fee study. It started a little bit earlier than the service analysis, so most of that expense should show up in 2016. $60,000 for our recent exponent electrical power reliability study. $100,000 for Lake Point Consulting, which included Muni Manage as a consultant and parametrics. A portion of that is being reimbursed to the general fund from the developer. $216,000 for the capital project manager, who was not budgeted in the general fund at all. I'll explain this one a little further. When this position was envisioned, it was anticipated they'd be fully funded by the Sammamish River Bridge project. And the preferential treatment for these type of positions would be to budget for those in the general fund, in this case in the engineering department, and then have the general fund reimburse for time spent on the projects. And that's just not the way we set it up when we prepared the budget 2 years ago, but we should have, so I'm providing for that now. The $200,000 for the franchise fees transferred to the street fund come from the $200,000 increase in the water sewer franchise fees. And we're anticipating tenant improvements for the hangar building at the Kenmore Village of $150,000. So this is a transfer to the Kenmore Village Fund for that purpose. The total impact on the general fund then would be that total amended revenues would be $22,025,000, and total amended expenditures would be $24,100,000. The impact on the ending fund balance is this. When we last amended the budget, we anticipated that the ending fund balance would be $2,497,000. With these revenue adjustments of $977,000 and expenditure adjustments of $1,328,000, our projected new ending fund balance per budget would be $2,146,000. Now, I want to point out that this is different than what our projections are. This is the budget, being amended to reflect certain significant activity, but our actual projections, where we look at take a more focused look on our revenues and expenditures, we think we'll actually close the year with $3.1 million. And you'll see that in the preliminary budget.
So the reason for this more conservative number is it's for legal budgeting authority. And so that's why it's a lower number than what is projected in the biennium budget that we've proposed. So it's just a very conservative approach to making sure we have the legal budgeting authority to do what we need to do, when in reality, the funding balance is expected to be quite a bit. The ending fund balance is expected to be quite a bit higher at the end of this year.
Conservative budget, a little less conservative projections.
Councilmember Smith.
Thanks, Joanne. I have just two questions. One on the, with the reimbursement on the Lake Point Consulting, can you tell me, you said some of it will be reimbursed. When does that then show as revenue in 2017? Or where will that reimbursement show, and what is the amount that at that $100,000 that we can expect?
On the Lake Point project?
Yes.
That reimbursement, well, you may not show up on the revenue side. When there is a direct reimbursement of a specific expenditure, our accounting practices are that we reduce the expenditure accordingly.
So I thought we were going to, so then that's the net, the $100,000 is the net.
No, actually, it's the gross.
It's the gross.
It's the gross estimate.
So when do we get reimbursed for those consulting fees, and how do we and what percentage of that will be reimbursed?
As we pay the bills for the consultant, we prepare an invoice to the developer.
Okay.
And I can't tell you tonight yet if any of those invoices have been paid.
Okay. Okay.
But that's the arrangement that's been made.
Okay.
And they're paying 50% of the Muni Manage invoices.
All right.
A portion of this is also parametrics costs, but I don't believe that those were eligible for reimbursement.
That's correct.
Councilmember Curtis.
So I had a question on the west end of 522. When we switched engineering firms, it seems like there was a reimbursement that came back to us. Was that in this year or this biennium, and would that show up here as extra income? Wasn't there some settlement?
Was that the settlement?
Settlement.
With the engineering firm?
Correct.
Well, that's not showing up here because we're only looking at the general fund in my presentation so far, and I did not adjust for that in the capital fund.
It will show up somewhere, though?
It will show up as an actual receipt.
Okay.
In the transportation capital fund.
All right, thank you.
Councilmember Smith.
I have one more question, and you explained it, but I still don't understand it, and that's the 216, and I was going to ask you about it, so I appreciate the fact you explained it. It wasn't making sense. On the public works, engineering salary and benefit, it was the $216,000 thing. Can you tell me that again?
Yes. It was a bad budgeting practice initially to assume that we were going to pay for the engineer entirely out of that project. So his salary and benefits when he came on board and when we did the budget were never accounted for in the engineering department. So the engineering department's salary and benefits never reflected the capital project manager for the bridge.
Okay.
We should have done that, and that's what you'll actually see that in another instance tonight, because he didn't spend 100% of his time on the bridge, so 100% of his time was never eligible for reimbursement. As it turned out, it was only a portion of his time, maybe 50% if that, because he also ended up being the project manager for the town green, which is not an outside funded project. So if you were to look at the engineering fund.
He's also project manager for a couple other projects, including 62nd Avenue.
Oh, some of the sidewalk projects,
Yeah,
right.
and 202nd.
So if you were to look at the engineering budget by itself, you would see salary and wages are way over because he's being paid out of the engineering department, but we never established a budget for him in that department.
Okay.
So that's what we should have done is put his salary and benefit budget in the engineering department, and then as he was able to incur chargeable time, reimburse the general fund for that chargeable time into revenue.
Okay.
So that's what we're going to do as we complete and close the books, but that's not how we budgeted it.
Okay, I actually get it now. Thank you.
Good, good.
In the end, the capital projects do pay back the general fund for his time, but we still have to budget for it in the general fund. The one exception, though, is Town Square. The Town Square is not reimbursing back the general fund.
We've primarily tried to do that where, especially where it's allowable to charge time to outside sources of funding. The grants, for instance, allow you to pass through some direct costs of salary and benefits.
Any other questions? All right, thank you. I declare the public hearing open.
Excuse me, I
Yeah.
wasn't
Oh,
quite
sorry.
finished.
Oh, sorry.
Just a few more slides, I promise.
That's fine.
Because there were adjustments in a few other funds that I'd like to mention. So the street fund, we needed to recognize the $200,000 in franchise fees transfers from the general fund. Also, we wanted to budget for half of the traffic engineer's salary and benefits in the street fund for the work that he was responsible for in the neighborhood traffic improvements that are charged to that fund. And then also, the street funds suffered from those higher liability insurance premiums from WCIA, so I wanted to provide an appropriation for that. In the public art fund, pretty small potatoes here, but the beginning fund balance was $728 better than the budget, so we allowed for that on the revenue side. Our expenditure budget was only $1,000. We overspent that by $92. So we still have to make an amendment to make sure our budget is not less than our actual expenditures. Kenmore Village Fund, there's a $30,000 reimbursement from Main Street for some soil testing costs that weren't anticipated or included in the Town Square budget. So this amendment recognizes that revenue from Main Street and increases the budget accordingly, and also recognizes the $150,000 transfer from the general fund for tenant improvements. There's an adjustment in the Park Impact Fee Fund and the Park Capital Fund, primarily for the St. Edward ball fields. And even though we don't have a budget for a capital project, we have still incurred costs associated with that project, preliminary costs, permitting, et cetera. So we needed to establish a budget in the Park Capital Fund. We anticipate we'll spend about $152,000 and fund it with a transfer from the park impact fees. And once again here, we had budgeted for the park project manager in the Park Capital Fund. This removes that position from that Park Capital Fund because it's not a capital project, and we'll use the same methodology to charge her time that's spent on projects back to the project and reimburse the general fund. So the total citywide revenue adjustments are $1.5 million, $500,000 of which is an inter-fund revenue, bringing our total citywide amended revenues to $61,202,000. On the expenditure side, these adjustments amount to $1,594,000 with the same inter-fund transactions. Total amended expenditures are $70,859,000. This concludes my comments. You're welcome to open the public hearing then, or I can answer any questions. And as I mentioned, we'll bring this back as an ordinance on December 12th.
Questions? Hearing none. I declare the public hearing open for proposed budget amendments to the 2015-16 biennial budget. Is anybody wishing to be heard?
There's no one signed up.
Anybody wishing to be heard? Anybody wishing to be heard on the proposed budget amendments for the 2015-16 biennial budget? Seeing no one coming forward, I declare the public hearing closed. All right, next item then is a public hearing on allowing drive-through service as a temporary use for another year at 6532 Northeast Bothell Way in downtown commercial zone. You don't look like Samantha.
She got lucky and took the evening off, so I got the pleasure of coming and presenting this.
Wonderful.
But this is regarding the temporary use permit for the Espresso Works coffee drive-through located at the Shell property. Our code requires us to conduct a public hearing and have council authorization on any temporary uses that are over 90 days. And this is the second year that we've brought this to you. The first year has passed, and so now it's time to bring this to you again for this year's approval. So essentially, this would be to grant another year to the temporary use permit that was issued for the Espresso Works building. The reason that it requires a temporary use permit is because of the use. The drive-through standalone use is a prohibited use. And so the only types of drive-through businesses that are allowed on SR 522 are accessory to the business. And so this being a standalone, it's prohibited and requires a temporary use permit. And since it's over 90 days, requires council's approval.
Questions? Councilmember Sperry.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Have there been any issues or anything during this year with the...
No, I haven't received any concerns or complaints or anything from our coworkers or internally, any of the public.
Thank you.
Seeing no other questions, I will declare the public hearing open on allowing a drive-through service as temporary use for another year at 6532 Northeast Bothell Way in the downtown commercial zone.
There's no one signed up.
Anybody wishing to be heard? Anybody wishing to be heard on allowing drive-through service as a temporary use for another year at 6532 Northeast Bothell Way in the downtown commercial zone? Seeing no one coming forward, I declare the public hearing closed. Next item on the agenda is a motion to allow drive-through service as a temporary use for another year at 6532 Northeast Bothell Way in the downtown commercial zone. Mr. Hampson, anything to add?
Nothing to add. Any other questions?
Seeing or hearing no other questions, Chair will accept a motion to allow drive-through service as a temporary use for another year at 6532 Northeast Bothell Way in the downtown commercial zone.
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, the clerk please take the roll.
Councilmember Sperry.
Yes.
Councilmember Herbig.
Yes.
Mayor Baker.
Yes.
Councilmember Smith.
Yes.
Councilmember Danuski.
Yes.
Councilmember Curtis.
Yes.
6-0.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hampson. Next item on the agenda is the adoption of ordinance number 16-0434, bond ordinance. Ms. Gregory.
Good evening again, Mayor, Council members. This is a really momentous night for the City of Kenmore. I have with me Stacy Lewis of the Pacifica Law Group as we present for your final approval the bond ordinance to issue up to $10 million worth of unlimited tax general obligation bonds for the City of Kenmore. So if you recall, we adopted a bond election ordinance back in June of 2016 that authorized the placement of a $19,750,000 bond measure for voter consideration on the November 8th election to fund those projects identified during the Imagine Kenmore process. Proposition 1 was approved by the voters on November 8th, 2016, and the bond ordinance tonight before you provides authorization to issue bonds and delegates authority to the city manager and the finance director for a limited time and within limited parameters, specific parameters, to approve interest rates and maturity dates, redemption terms, and maturities. Last week was the first reading of the bond ordinance, and tonight we have an opportunity to ask any questions or have anything explained in further detail in the ordinance. Stacy's here to help out with that endeavor prior to your consideration of that ordinance.
Questions? Hearing none.
Well, I'll answer a question that was asked last week then.
Okay.
And perhaps Councilmember Sperry, understood this from the discussion, but there was the comment about why in the title does it authorize us to issue up to $10 million worth of bonds, but the first whereas refers to the $19,750,000. So the election authorized up to $19,750,000, but as you have heard us speak, we plan to issue bonds actually in two series, or tranches, as the attorney's term for that. So this bond ordinance is specific to this first series, up to $10 million, although we are anticipating actually it being $9,750,000. So that's the reason for the difference between what is stated in the title and what is stated in the first whereas.
Any further questions? Councilmember Sperry?
So this was obviously a lot of new vocabulary here. There was a part in here about, it looked like there's some record keeping on what bonds have been issued, and some that from what I could understand, that it was going to be the responsibility of the city to do that. So I guess that would be my question. Is there some additional burden of record keeping with this? I'm seeing a head nod, so that probably is.
Yeah. Good question. The city's planning to issue the bonds on a tax-exempt basis to be able to achieve the lowest interest rates on behalf of the property tax payers in the city. With that tax-exempt status comes a number of requirements under the Internal Revenue Code. And among those requirements is a requirement that the city maintain records associated with the bond issue, as well as the use of the property through the life of the bonds plus 7 years. So the IRS would like to be able to come and visit anytime during that period and have available to the agents records to demonstrate that the bonds were spent on the approved purposes and that they weren't used inappropriately for tax-exempt bonds.
Okay, that makes sense.
Councilmember Herbig.
Excuse me, can you remind me again when you expect the city to go out for the second tranche?
The current expectation is December of 2019.
Oh,
okay.
That's fast.
Thanks.
3 years. The reason for that being that there's the expectation that with the first issue, we will spend down those proceeds within 3 years, or very close to it, and we'll be moving along in process with those projects at that time, so we wouldn't want to delay. We'll go right for the second issue if at that time it makes sense. We're not locked into that, but that's the assumption that we're using at this time.
Councilmember Smith?
I have a question with regards to the recent, since we discussed this last, we have some changes at the national political scene, and I know there's also been some ripples in the municipal bond markets and interest rates. Can you tell me how that would affect us in this process?
I'll take that first. Last week, about a week after the election, so I guess it was just last week, Lindsay Savde of Piper Jaffray informed me that bonds, municipal tax-exempt bonds had gone up about 50 basis points. So that's about 0.5% interest. And that was the cushion that we had built in for this first issue based on what was actually happening in the market at the time we developed our assumptions. So we've kind of used that up right now. But it has meant a slight increase in the interest rates on the bonds.
And those interest rates will actually be set when the bonds are priced and the bond purchase agreement is signed. And at that moment, the interest rates will be locked in the debt service. So, of course, it's subject to market movement between now and that date.
And I think that will be on or close to the end of the month. It's going to happen very soon.
Okay. Thank you.
On or close to the end of the month, I was thinking early December.
It might be the first week in December.
Okay.
Any further questions? Hearing none. Chair will entertain a motion on the adoption of ordinance number 16-0434, the bond ordinance.
So moved.
Moved and seconded. Any further questions? The clerk want to take the roll on the first ever bond issue.
Sure. Councilmember Sperry?
Yes.
Councilmember Smith?
Yes.
Councilmember Danuski?
Yes.
Councilmember Herbig?
Yes.
Councilmember Curtis?
Yes.
Mayor Baker?
Yes.
6-0.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Next item on the agenda is Rhododendron Park Boardwalk Project update. Ann Stanton, Parks Project Manager, and Ms. Bent.
This is always the nerve-wracking part. Will this actually open?
This is the easy part. You've done all the hard stuff.
So now we've got our technical difficulties sorted out. You can see in front of you the Rhododendron Boardwalk project. And this is exciting because this is one of the projects that was on the Walkways and Waterways bond measure. So we're excited to kind of give you an update about this project. And if you recall, this project would extend the boardwalk from the interior of the park down to the Sammamish River to meet the public's request for Get Me to the Water. So the project is included as a park CIP project, and you'll see that later in the budget proposal. And funding would be through the bond funds. We already have a consultant contract on board, so we are really ready to get moving on this project. And we're hoping that the engineering and building permit documents will be done in 2017 with construction in 2018. We did some design work in 2013 and a permit was issued in 2015 for the shoreline permit. So we do have some of the land use entitlements already in place, which is a bonus actually. So the master plan for the park also anticipated having trail connections from the park down to the river, so we're consistent with the master plan. And Anne spent a lot of time earlier this year applying for RCO grants to help fund this project. And while it was a great project, we don't think we'll be successful in funding based on the rankings from the RCO funding board. But you never know. So that being said, just to give you a little bit of background, I am going to let Anne step through some of the revisions to the trail alignment that we have incorporated to make this a better project for pedestrian and public access to the waterfront.
Thank you, Debbie. So, Mayor, council members, what you see before you is the diagram or the concept plan that was submitted to the state for grants. It included the boardwalk. It also included the float. And to make this project more competitive, we paved the 68th Avenue gravel path and also added a new paved path that connected all the way to the Rhododendron Park's developed park area, so it created an accessible route. As we move forward in the design, the engineer suggested that we realign the new paths to make a more gently curving access point for carrying boats and getting to the river. So this is the current path alignment. This is really what we wanted to show you tonight and give you a chance to comment on it. And there should have been a third slide, but there isn't. So, oh, here we are. Good. We've already got SEPA and shoreline approved, and the only remaining permit are the construction permits for engineering. So, once we get the funding and the engineering permits, we are ready to build.
So I guess we're here to answer any questions you may have on the reasons for the change in the alignment, and just to kind of get your, I guess, thumbs up to keep moving forward on this alignment.
Councilmember Sperry?
Can you toggle back and forth between the two slides just to...
Yep.
That's all right.
Councilmember Sperry?
Sure, I was going to wait and have them show the slides, and then I'll ask my question.
Okay. We're done.
So we've done with the slides, so if there's any information on the one of the three slides that we can always kind of toggle back and forth to. And sure. I think Rob's got...
For my benefit, can you go back to the old alignment and then compare it to the new alignment?
So where you see it says pave existing gravel path, that has a little curve in it at the end. And the new connection to the parking lot at Rhododendron, the accessible route to the waterfront, is a more gently shaping S-curve rather than a right angle. So we can go back one more time. You see here, this is what we sent to the state, and then as we moved ahead, we realized we really wanted to straighten out that turn.
So the good news on this realignment is it doesn't affect the permits that we already have in place. So those are still valid, and these changes are considered sort of modifications to that existing permit.
Councilmember Sperry.
Thank you, Mayor. So just to be clear, so you've got some of it in red, and there's some different, obviously, markings there. Can you talk about what parts of the boardwalk, what are we looking at here?
Sure. The boardwalk, it goes through the wetland. It's the black, looks like railroad tracks.
Okay.
So that's the boardwalk. That hasn't changed. It's shown in brown on this diagram.
Mm-hmm.
But this is more working out the connections to the existing 68th and the park.
So the red then is really like a gravel path.
Okay. We're looking at paving it. Either.
Oh, it's going to be paved.
Yeah, it's the existing path from 68th is gravel, but to make it fully accessible, we'd be paving it.
Wow.
Councilmember Smith.
And does this include, I see where it says new parking and improved access roads, so is that entire part of city-owned parking lot and everything, is that all paved then as part of this project as well?
Yes, it is, and it adds about 7 new parking stalls on that turnaround, that route.
So once those are added, we will have to maybe have to consider some operations for parking. Because this is on the park property, and currently a lot of people park on the park property when they're accessing the boat ramp on the other side of the bridge. So that's sort of an operation issue that we'll have to address.
Councilmember Herbig.
I know this might be a slightly different topic, but since you have it on the PowerPoint, I wanted to ask about it. You have the future floating dock on there, and I was wondering if there's been any movement or any progress made towards getting all of the okays we need on that.
Yeah, we got the HPA today.
Okay, where are we with the tribes, though?
With the tribes, they have their comments. The Corps of Engineers has collected them, and it looks like it's very livable. They just want to be present with any ground disturbing activity.
Great, thank you.
So, what about the boathouse? Because now the path I see is going where the boathouse was going to sit. Is the boathouse out of the picture?
No, not as part of this project. So the
I understand that. I'm just looking at the routing of the path.
So the shoreline permit that we had included an area for the pad for the boathouse. If that project moves forward, we would have to sort of provide the. We don't have anything that shows that, do we?
Well, the pad is shown in the RCO application. We just left the pad and we left the pad and we took off the boathouse. So we left the footprint you see there is the plan that is set up to receive a building pad in the future.
So the other thing is, I see the parking lot spaces off to the side, and I see the one at the end. I'm just curious, is one ADA spot enough? Because I know that we've had a lot of people, well, not a lot, but we've had 2 or more disabled up at Squires Landing participating in paddling. And I know this is more of a rowing area, but I'm wondering if one ADA spot is enough.
Well, if we could, instead of having one ADA and 2 normal, regular stalls at the float, we certainly could stripe it for 2 ADA stalls. We're not...
And then seeing this in the summertime, since this is the city side and the new boardwalk, I'm hoping that city people will be able to park there, because usually it's just jammed up with boat trailers. So are we going to have it signed?
It is signed now.
So this is more well, yeah, but nobody pays them.
I see the city manager eager to jump in to answer this question, and I can supplement that too.
Yes.
You know, I'm probably more passionate about that than you are.
And why is it filled with boat trailers?
No, so we did sign it, and I hope that it improved this summer. I haven't heard any reports of it not being worse, but haven't heard any reports of it being better, for that matter, either. So, yeah, we can definitely get some enforcement down there, and hopefully the signage combined with enforcement will work. We'll definitely continue to make sure that people that are patronizing Rhododendron Park will have parking dedicated to them down there.
Okay. Any other questions? Councilmember Curtis.
Question on the ADA spots. Does the state facility on the other side of 68th have any designated ADA spots?
Yes, it does.
I guess I would hate to designate 2 out of 7 spots as ADA, because most of the time they aren't used and nobody else can park in them, so they sit unused a large percent of the time. So I'd be more inclined to have one, knowing there is some extra on the other side.
And those at the other side you pay for. That requires a permit. That requires a permit to get into that side of the park.
Yeah, a Discover Pass.
A Discover Pass, whereas ours is city-owned, and we don't need a Discover Pass to get in there. That was my concern.
I think it will become clear as we operate the facility whether there is a need for more ADA stalls. I think that's very doable.
As long as that flexibility is there.
Yes, it is.
Your Honor?
Yep.
Just for the record and for clarification, we all know what I'm about to say, but for those watching via live stream, and just for the record, the boathouse was brought up. Just want to be clear, super clear, that the boathouse is not going to be funded with the bond measure proceeds, and that if a boathouse goes there someday, I think the council's preference is that it be paid for with nonprofit or private sector funding or some other funding, but definitely not bond proceeds.
Right.
So want to make sure that that is clear, because it was made clear during the time that the campaign was going on, and so I just want to have it be clear again. And so, Patty, please put that in the minutes. Thanks.
Yes, this is not part of the bond. Councilmember Smith.
Regarding the parking, since I believe most of our residents are under the assumption they need a Discover Pass to park down there, it might not be a bad idea to put something in our news bulletin that goes out, so at least it's a way to let the residents know that they don't need, with a little map like this, so that they know they can go down there and park.
On the east side.
On the east side, exactly.
Yeah.
I think it's worthwhile just to, it may benefit some that don't.
There was a sign at the driveway entrance on the east side that said Discover Pass required.
I remember that.
And we had that taken down and put up under the bridge, I think.
Yep.
Any other questions?
Exciting.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I take it that you're all okay with the revisions to the alignment? Yes.
Yes, indeed.
Perfect. Okay.
All right, next item on the agenda, Morelands Park 2016 Master Plan. And Debbie, you guys, this is the Ann and Debbie show.
Sure, why not?
Here we go.
Here we go. So Anne's got a little PowerPoint presentation, but just to give you a little bit of background, the master plan was approved in 2006, and the master plan was anticipating park improvements, including improvements to the athletic field. And so in 2014, we applied for some RCO grants, and we were successful in obtaining those grants. So being as we have obtained those grants, that project now appears in the CIP, which I believe you saw in October, and it was part of the budget presentation this evening. So since then, since the RCO grants and we're successful in that, Anne has been working really hard on with a consultant on refining the design, because once you've gone from a master plan to now trying to build it, there needs to be some changes made. So to accommodate various components of the project, and Anne will go over those. Anne's been working closely with the school district on bringing them along with the design and getting their questions and comments answered. There was also outreach to the public. A meeting was held at the elementary school to see what the public support was, because since 2006, I'm sure the neighbours are wondering what on earth was going on. Was something ever going to happen at this park? So again, we're very excited that this is another park project which will improve Morelands Park, which is, a well-loved neighbourhood park, and it's also unique, actually, that the school district use this park quite a bit for the playground. So we also know we have to work closely with the school district, and not only the park improvements, but we will also have to put together a revised agreement with the school district to outline terms of use and operations and maintenance, because the agreement that we currently have has been in place since 1994, so it's somewhat outdated. And with these renovations, will need to be updated. Okay, so I will now turn this over to Anne to run you through the PowerPoint presentation.
Okay, thank you, Debbie. So as you probably know, Morelands Park is a small gem that's tucked into the southeast part of Kenmore, and it was dedicated as a park in 1943 by the Inglewood Improvement Club, and it may just be the city's oldest park. It has the only ball field that's owned outright by the city. It has a play area and 4 acres of open lawn and some really lovely large trees. And there's a view to the Cascades from the middle of the park where the new picnic shelter is proposed. And what the park does not have is a single clear entry. Its only public side is along 84th Avenue Northeast, and traveling past it, the sign is easily missed, and the chain link fence looks actually more like a school district than a park. And at the park, there are 2 breaks in the fence, one here at the north entrance and one here at the south end. And there's a 30-foot wide strip of property just outside this fence that is actually owned in half by the city and half by the school district. It's a 32-foot wide strip of land. It was a former roadway. So the city also owns a 16-foot wide driveway on 81st Avenue, which is on the west side of the park. There is no physical separation between the park driveway and the access to the 2 homes, the one you see here and the one behind it. In our project pre-application review, we learned that 16 feet is not adequate for a park driveway, and we need to find another solution for long-term ball field parking. Our proposed solution for now is a shared parking agreement with the school district. The driveway leads to this gravel parking area that's next to both the outfield behind it and the play area, which is to the right. The parking is used by the school district and the sports leagues, and general park visitors also use it, but to a much lower degree. As we can see, Morelands is really 3 parks in one. It's a neighborhood park, a ball field, and a school playground. So here's a 1961 aerial photo of the park, and it looks much the same as today with parking, ball field, and that small batting practice diamond and the open lawn. It also had a road, that road I described a minute ago, crossing along the south side. So this photo was taken before the elementary school opened in 1963, and the first Romanian Pentecostal church was built to the north with a very large parking lot. So 10 years ago, so Morelands Park actually uses the church parking lot it uses the park as its playfield, and the school district has maintained the park since before the city incorporated. With the church's permission, parents of Moreland students use the church parking lot for student drop-off and pickup, and students walk across the park on a gravel path built for that use. The church also allows parking for evening school events, meaning that families walk across the park in the dark. You can see also, here you can really see the 2 strips of land. One is owned by the city and one is owned by the school district on the south side of the park. So in 2006, the city adopted this development plan for Morelands Park. The general layout is basically unchanged since the 1960s, but it does add paths, a restroom for the ball field, and a picnic shelter. It doesn't create a clear park entry, but property acquisition for that has been included in the CIP in the past. The city, as Debbie said, secured 2 grants in 2014 for this renovation, and the funds were made available just this last March. Since then, we've updated the cost estimate and the plan, as you see here, in order to include under drainage for the whole ball field. We looked at ways to streamline the plan. So we made the restroom smaller. We swapped its location with the picnic shelter so that we can use the picnic shelter also as the student pickup and drop-off shelter. And the outfield was expanded to the full 220-foot dimension by eliminating a duplicate path. So first and foremost, we want to upgrade the ball field with this project. And the neighborhood behind the backstop off to the left there she totally supports this really tall backstop to stop the mini balls that now end up in her backyard. She can't see it with the trees there. And the city will take over maintenance to maintain a really game quality field. So we want to replace the shelter. The one on the left is what we have at the student pickup drop-off. The one on the right is what we have at Rhododendron Park, which we propose for this park. And on the left, but down below, that's the play area at Morelands Park now, and the structure on the right is one of the designs we're looking at to replace it. And then we want to add a restroom. This is the one that's at the boat launch. It's about the same size. It's the design we're looking at. And on the right is the Wallace Swamp Creek Park pathways, where we want to add paved pathways. And then the benches and picnic tables you see there are at North Shore Summit Park, which we'd also like to use at Morelands. So our target bid amount is $1.14 million. But our 30% cost estimate was actually closer to $1.5 million, even with the cost-saving design changes that we've identified to date. The 60% estimate will give us a much firmer handle on costs. It is very possible that the pending lease with the school district can include district participation in acquiring the play equipment. And the final bid will include alternatives to reduce the project cost if needed, or a budget adjustment to complete the full plan can occur in order to award the full project. So next steps. We're here tonight for your approval of the 2016 update to the plan. Next steps are to negotiate the lease, acquire permits, and complete construction in 2017. After a year to establish the outfield, we do expect to open the field for soccer, softball, and Little League use starting in 2019. So with that, are there any questions?
Councilmember Curtis.
So my biggest concern with this park all along is that the school uses it all day. And they're going to trample the grass and destroy everything we're putting into this. And in pretty much all other circumstances that I know of, schools are supposed to provide their own land and their own upkeep to provide play areas for their students. So this is a wonderful, great deal for them. And I think they should either contribute substantially or not use our park enough to damage it.
Councilmember Smith?
Yeah, my comment has to do with on the parking situation. I know there's a couple items you mentioned in here in the agenda item where it's talking about long-term, we don't have a solution or anything for the parking, and short-term, we may be able to work some out. I can't imagine a better scenario where to try to work with the school district for parking, since they have all that parking space. It makes no sense to me to have to acquire these other adjoining properties with the thought of turning them into a parking lot or something. It just, when we've got all this parking, and it's completely complementary to the school use. So I would encourage us to go down the, work with the school district, whatever we can on the parking scenario, not just short-term, but also long-term.
Okay.
That's certainly the preferred direction, and that's what we've been discussing with the school district. And I guess any terms would then be outlined in a future lease arrangement.
Councilmember Danuski.
Yeah, I had the same parking comment that, one of the challenges with school districts is they lock the gates, so it'll be a challenge to keep the gate unlocked into the evening there. So that's just one thing to work through. My other question, I just lost my other question. Is this park going to be open to the public all day long or during school hours? Is it going to be closed because the students will be on that, or are you still working through that?
I think Rob's been, if I can let Rob jump in, I think he's got an answer for that.
The park is unusable to the public during school hours, period. I've gone there during school hours, and they immediately come up to me and say, I need to sign in at the office.
Well, that might be something we need to change if it's a
but,
nice, wonderful park.
Right. So it's really not practical for me to walk my dog through the middle of the park during school hours. I'll be intercepted by somebody who will tell me I can't be there. And it is awkward for public to kind of walk onto quote-unquote school property during school hours for security reasons. So we are, in our lease negotiations with them, we are going to assume that they are making the park inaccessible to the public during school hours, 180 days a year. And that will go into the compensation that we need to get from them. And so that'll factor in. So what we're working on is a lease amount based on maintenance costs and value of the real estate. And then we'll prorate that lease amount based on 180 days a year. So, Councilmember Smith, or Curtis, you mentioned about the wear and tear on the fields. Yeah, that is a concern we share as well. So one thing we will need to also include in the lease is rest periods on that ball field area in particular. Probably not on the rest of the park, but on that, is that the western end by the where the ball field is?
The outfield is.
So we'll need to put in there rest periods where kids can't play on it for so many days at a time.
So I guess a mother with a couple of toddlers can't make use of that playground equipment that we're putting in. So it seems to me that playground equipment that we're putting in is pretty much, during the week, exclusive use for the school.
And that will need to go into the lease negotiations.
You know, I look at Rhododendron Park and the way Rhododendron Park is used by mothers and toddlers all day long. And here we've got brand new equipment in a perfectly great park, and it can't go in there. That just doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, I wouldn't be able to bring my 3-year-old toddler, not that I have one, but I wouldn't be able to bring my 3-year-old toddler.
Granddaughter, maybe.
Yeah. Now you got me nervous.
Scared him there.
Yeah, my heart just went a thump, thump. But, yeah, I wouldn't be able to bring a toddler there to play in the middle of the day. I'd be kicked out. It's too close to the school. During school, it's for all intents and purposes part of the school. Now, I could come there after school or on weekends or during the summer, but just not during school.
Councilmember Herbig.
I don't know. I just find the situation you described of stopping by the park, a city park during the day, and being kicked out is completely offensive.
Yeah.
And it seems like there's an education issue that needs to go on directly with the school, not through the school district, but maybe we need to have a conversation with the principal there and just let them know what's going on, and that if somebody wanders by and wants to use the park, they have every right to be on a public park, because that's just not right, what's happening right now.
Okay, so schools that don't have this situation, from a security standpoint, they have their school fenced off, and they don't want members of the public
Yeah, it's their proproperty. They can
coming
do that.
on there.
This is not their property.
Without a pass for
Right.
security reasons, for safety reasons. And so like when Deve and I and the RCO representative, we drove into that parking lot one day. It happened to be right during a recess. And we pulled into the parking lot. We got out of our cars, and I didn't even have both feet out of the car, and a recess monitor came up to me and said, "You need to go to the office and get a pass." And I think they're doing the right thing. I think that for security reasons, they can't have people like me wandering into the recess.
This is city property. This is not school district property.
But during school hours, it's pretty much...
Except our lease with them doesn't say that right now. I mean, just because, if they took a field trip someplace, would they be catching everybody that comes within 20 feet of their field trip group and demanding a pass? I mean, that's essentially what's going on here. They're going into our property, and they're telling our residents they can't come in. That's really offensive to me. I'm just putting that out there. This is... If we're going to pay for this, then our citizens need to be able to use the property. Or we need to be really fairly compensated to keep this up, because the past situation has obviously not been working out from a maintenance standpoint. Or the school district needs to figure out something else for their recesses. Maybe we do something with the playground area in particular and fence that off, or not fence it off, but somehow demarc it and not the fields, so that the kids could safely play in the playground during the school day, but maybe not use the fields. Because I couldn't tell you exactly why, but I am deeply offended at a recess monitor kicking out a citizen who wanders by into a public park. And I think we need to have a talk with the principal about that, because I don't know why. I'm just really, really, really ticked off when I heard that story.
I'd like to add that one of the things to keep in mind is one of its 3 roles is a neighborhood park, and that means it's the neighbors who are most likely to use it. You're not likely to drive there unless you have a ball game to play. And those neighbors are most likely the ones with the kids in the school. So we're kind of talking about the same people a lot of the time. We have an opportunity now. Up until now, the school district has been maintaining it, so it's kind of understandable that it has taken on more of a character of a school playground. But as the city maintains it, there's a chance here to open it up somewhat more. I think that's an easy thing to change and to add here. But they really are the same people. The ones that don't get access to the park during the school day, which is in the winter, fall, winter, spring, are the toddlers, the parents with their toddlers. And I see them there after school fairly often, which, if a parent is working, that's still a good time for them.
Councilmember Curtis.
Would there be any way that something could be done with, like, passes? So, like, there's some areas of the city you can only park in this area if you have a pass and you belong there and you have a house there. So people in the neighborhood could get a pass from the school and say, I have permission to be here. And they're the people who are going to use it during the day and go to the office and get one for the season instead of having to go get me in trouble every time they show up. So maybe something like that.
It really is worth looking into. I do understand the school district's perspective that they do need to, they have an obligation to keep the kids safe, and that's to know who's on their grounds, their park grounds, if they're not already students or employees.
I think we need to be creative because this doesn't really exist anywhere else that I know of. But something like that where they vet these people early in the year, and then they have permission to come and go, and it still gives that safety net that you want for the public schools.
Yeah.
You know who's coming and going.
Maybe you come in and sign up for a pass, and it's good for a month or something like that. And so there's some connection between knowing who they are.
So I think what we've heard is that there are certainly concerns with operations and use which need to be resolved, which is an important part of the project. But I would still like to get back to the main purpose that we're here tonight, is looking at the proposed improvements that have changed since the master plan was approved. We thought this was an appropriate time, after we've gone through some early discussions with the permitting side of the city, some early discussions with the school district, to get your feedback that this is the right direction for park improvements.
So these revisions, that's the question. Are they agreeable? Councilmember Smith and then Councilmember Curtis.
Yes, but based on this conversation, I mean, one of the things that might be worth thinking about, and I don't know that it is or it isn't, but maybe there's a way to design more of a natural barrier in here that you could easily close off a part of it for a resting period of the fields, or even for permanent non-playground use. Because right now, if I recall correctly, this entire park is open to as playground space, or is that incorrect?
Actually, the school district sets that north-south path as the limit of play. I think it's the large tree just to the right of it, just to the east of it. But the kids are restricted to the uphill portions on the left. And you've actually given me the idea that I've been working hard to reduce the cost of the project. And so I've been removing duplicated paths and duplicated shelters, and we have the plan to put a taught play structure in this playground. But what you're saying tells me, why not consider another location outside of this western half for the taught lot, so that, say, the east half of the park could be much more comfortably used by toddlers and parents with toddlers year-round, even during the school hours, because that would separate those two uses pretty nicely. And the path that goes along the north side and cuts down, I think people will still be able to walk through that park. They just don't want, the school district doesn't want people hanging around the play area, I think.
I would hate to see the kids go into the infield with their shovels and start digging in the dirt.
Yes, we're going to make them get a pass, right?
Councilmember Herbig.
So when I was growing up in North Seattle, I went to Hamilton Elementary in Wallingford, and it had a play area in the back where you could run around, and then directly adjacent to it was a city park, Wallingford Playfield, I think it's called. And the school used that pretty regularly for PE classes, for things like that.
Cross country, yeah.
Right. So I think there's probably some way to kind of make and you'd have everybody else still using the parks, the rest of the park, parents with toddlers, that sort of thing, people playing catch with their dogs. So I think there's probably a way to make this work.
Okay.
But I would just hate to have a whole area where we just tell people, hey, stay out.
Yeah.
Councilmember Curtis.
So this is in relationship to parking, and clearly the best option is to use other people's parking and work out some deal. Mm-hmm. And I'm pretty sure we couldn't change the design at this late date anyway, but I see the spot between kind of that loop path and the church. There's a section there that appears one could put parking in if we really ran out of space and there was nowhere else. Could you access that? I mean, could you get there from 84th?
Actually, we've looked at this, and we've met with the church, who have their access driveway just to the, what would that be? Northeast of their property line. And so the design for that path there is just that. So well spotted, is that we were trying to think sort of long term, that if something went awry with the school district property, what would be the options for the putting parking on the park property, and that was certainly one of the areas. You could access it from 84th, and we might be able to then work with the church on a joint access. So we've thought about this, and Anne's done some really careful looking at the layout of this park to think not only what makes sense now, but what would make sense in the future as well. So being very mindful, as she said, of removing improvements that would save costs. So she's all about creative design and saving costs, and we'll certainly take that into consideration as we move forward with discussions with the school district and try and come up with some creative options so that it's a win-win for everybody.
Councilmember Herbig.
Related to Councilmember Curtis's question, I would be very reluctant to want to add more concrete to or more asphalt to this at a later date. There's a lot of parking right next door to us at the church there. It's unused 6 days a week. There has to be a way for us to make some agreement with them for ball games or something there. I would imagine. They've
been very good partners, I think, with the school district for allowing parents to use a part of that parking lot for pickup and drop-off. They also are looking at their long-term plans, so while there may look like an abundance of parking today, that may not always be the case if they expand. So again, we think that there will be off-site options for partnerships with either the church or the school district, but we did want to make sure that as a sort of a last-ditch effort that we made sure that design could accommodate parking, which was obviously not the preferred choice.
Okay,
and would
thank
be
you.
a very long-term option.
City Manager.
Because we own the land and the lease terms coming up, this really puts us in the driver's seat, with one exception, and that is parking. We need to rely on someone to help us with parking or build our own additional on-site parking. That's not a good option, in my opinion, to build more parking, given what's been already pointed out, an abundance of parking around the property. It would be very redundant to have empty school parking spaces while we're filling up newly built parking spaces. Just doesn't make any sense. But that said, to put ourselves in an even better negotiating position with the school district, we need to have a BATNA on parking, a best alternative to a negotiated agreement on parking. We need to know that we can be able to go somewhere else for parking if our negotiations with the school district aren't going the way we want them to.
Brett, I think, haven't we been at it since about 2005?
Yes. No, I know this very, very well, and I'm excited to see us at least having this discussion. I really appreciate all the work that Debbie and Ann have done on this. You know, on Rob's point regarding the parking, you know, if you factored it, how much it would cost to actually construct parking, and I mean, you could amortize that cost, and boy, you could. It wouldn't take much to just throw something to the church as an inducement and then really enhance your negotiating position with the school district.
So 11 years later, I'm very happy with these revisions.
My job is done then.
Almost. Anything else? So we are being asked to approve these revisions. Do we want a formal motion, or do we want just a voice vote? We approve.
Can I ask one question? Did I hear that maybe looking into a tot lot to the east is something you want us to look at?
Well, we have the playground equipment, right? I mean, that's what you're talking about.
Oh, I've got it all together in one area for the school-age kids and the tot lot, the 2 to 5-year-old. And if we want to adjust this plan a little bit further, you would also authorize adding a separate area for the 2 to 5-year-old tot lot, in addition to this big play area that you see here for the school kids.
Well, I'm going back to the slides with the playground equipment. That would be off to an area to where could be accessed during the day by non-school people.
You could make you could put a smaller toddler lot on the east half of the park that could be more usable during the day, during the school day, by neighbors.
But
And
this
it
other playground equipment that you've shown in the plan
would generally be just for school kids
for
during the school
kids.
day. Yeah.
So we're building a playground then for these school kids.
Well,
And the whole neighborhood.
well, the neighborhood will also get
Well,
to
not
use it.
during the daytime.
So I think we understand what your concerns are, and we're working hard to kind of work with the school district to figure out what the contributions they might need to make, as Rob said, to make it sort of a win-win. We have brought up the idea of them either entirely funding the playground equipment or providing a substantial part, being as they are the primary users for a bulk of the time.
I guess I'm going back to when we first met Councilmember Danuski here, when she came in with the proposal for us to go 50-50 with Kenmore Elementary, which seemed to be a pretty good.
Yeah, and we did less than 50/50. Her Kenmore did less than
Right.
50/50.
But still, I mean,
Yeah, and that's working well. There's people there
it's
all
working well.
weekend long.
yeah.
Yeah.
So this one, we're doing all of it. So that I get, well, we beat this horse to death.
I think so.
Councilmember Herbig.
I just have one quick question. What, on the southern part of the lot, what kind of, is there any sort of barrier that kind of demarcates where the park ends and where the school begins? Because I'm looking at like Google Earth right now, and I'm not really seeing.
Right. Right now, the play area the border of the play area extends about 1.5 feet onto school property, and I'm proposing in this plan to put the border right on the property line.
So would there be some sort of like fence with gates, or would it just be open between the two properties?
We're looking at having it just open now. We've got the parking lot is shared. There's double loaded aisle on the parking lot, and then the play area would be all open. And then everything where you see green on the plan, that's got a fence. That's fenced off. That's private property actually on the south side of that green area. So there's that west half.
In that driveway, is that on the south side there where the houses are?
Mm-hmm.
There's no fence along that driveway. It's just trees, right? That part of the park is open. It's not fenced.
Are you talking about the southeast side that I pointed out that
Where
there's
the
a
houses
strip?
are.
It is fenced.
Pardon?
It is
That
fenced.
driveway is fenced?
It's actually fenced 16 feet into city property. So the old roadbed is outside.
I just don't remember the fence there. That's
Yeah,
all,
it's
because
there.
I know people who live in those two houses. and
Okay,
so
yeah, there's a
I
fence.
just call the fence.
Yeah.
Okay.
Chain links.
Councilmember Smith?
Since we're going through these design discussions about play areas, I would say it is nice that the main play structure is by the ball field area, because oftentimes it's families that are going to the games, and it's nice when parents don't have to go over a hill to see if their kids are okay or something. And so I think that's actually a nice feature. And also where the picnic shelter is actually a great location too, because you can kind of watch the game or something if you want, or you can be looking down at the other area. So
Great.
And I guess looking at the tot lot that we have there at Rhododendron Park and how heavily it's used, I mean, I certainly don't want to increase cost on this thing, beyond budget, but it would be nice to see something for the tots. Yes.
So my question on that, are you thinking about moving the toddler part of it from the main play area up to that, or duplicating the toddler piece?
I would move it up closer to the picnic shelter.
Wonderful.
I have a question.
Councilmember Danuski.
So just operationally on moving the tot lot somewhere else, that might make sense during the day for toddlers, but on the weekends, the mom's going to come with kids that want to play.
That's true.
On both the little kid
Yep.
and the big kid, and now you've got your kids on opposite ends of the park, which doesn't make any mom happy anywhere.
So I think it's going to be a cost issue, and it's also going to be a user issue as well. So we just need to do some balancing of the pros and cons. So I guess what I might suggest is, if it looks that might be an option that would keep us within budget and is a better option for users, I guess we'd be saying, would you be open to that, or we'll keep it as it's currently proposed. So I think if we can kind of get at least, it may look like it does right now, but if there is an option to move it and it's a better option, we know, and you're okay with that, we can then kind of look at that as an alternative.
All right, so we're back up. Councilmember Curtis.
So my inclination is to leave it as it is, and then if somewhere down the line we really think we need a second one and it's important enough to spend money on it, we could always duplicate the toddler one. So for during the school day,
Okay, and
that could
I
happen.
did do the math this afternoon. The school hours comprise 25% of daylight hours in the year. So there's still 75% of daylight hours that are not during the school period. So that's a pretty big share of the time also.
All right. So back to the original question. You want a motion, or are you just happy with consensus with us saying yes?
Consensus, yes, would be fine. I did want to mention that Mary Neifert with the school district is here tonight. I don't know if you want to ask for comments.
She's waving her hand back there frantically. We don't normally do that, but okay.
Thank you. I wasn't sure of your process, so I didn't know if I could raise my hand frantically or otherwise. So I appreciate this might be different than what normally happens. Would you like me to sign in? Do you want me to go up?
Yes, come up here and. Just take that one of the open seats there.
Okay. Yeah, it would have been helpful.
And do I turn it on?
It's on.
It's on.
Okay. I want to thank you for...
And you are?
My name is Mary Neifert. I work for the school district. I'm an occupational therapist in North Shore School District. I'm at 4 campuses this year. I love my experience at Morelands, but I do want to thank you for inviting me to jump in here. I want to apologize for the experience you had as you came for your visit and got what sounds like a pretty abrupt greeting from the playground supervisors. I would like to say we love it when you guys come. As you're discovering, the park is never closed. It's not closed during the school hours, meaning nobody is asked to leave. You would be asked to sign in for safety of our students. You can imagine if you were responsible for 700, close to 800 students, you would need some structure on your playground. So I'm sorry that your greeting didn't feel welcoming. We do welcome people. Secondly, I liked Anne's thought, which was that the people coming to play at the playground are the families who live in the neighborhood. They are the kids at our school. So they're the families with school-age children who are coming to the playground. I very, very often see toddlers through the weekday, families with toddlers, parents, and the toddlers stay and play at our playground currently after the kids go into their class at about 8:35-ish. You'll go out to the playground. There are still a lot of families who are able to stay and play a bit, and these are families with toddlers. That's fine. The toddlers and families are welcome. They often feel like it's not very safe for them when the children come out for their recess time because there are so many of them. But quite often they're there because the older sibling is in school. So it's a pretty symbiotic relationship. So I can hear how much you guys care and all the thinking around it. I like some creativity. Sure, maybe we can figure this out because our intention would never be to say that you can't be here. You meaning the greater you. There is a North Shore School District policy that there's no dogs on campuses, and so that gets a little bit something to consider. People who want to come walk their dogs would be encouraged to be aware of that school district policy. There again, it can be a little bit of a gray area, as you can imagine. I'm imagining you guys have families and you may have kids and dogs yourself. You know what you've seen at pickup times and drop-off times. So my two last things, please. You would always be welcome. I'd be happy to come out and meet you on the playground, and we can talk about what we're seeing and what's working well and what we can make even better. And then very lastly, I appreciate Anne's hard work on this. She's been receiving input and questions since the summertime, and and I think it's great. I'm very excited. I have to admit I was a little taken aback at the what seemed like some extreme maybe disagreements or anger toward the school district. I didn't know that was evident until I was here tonight, so I'm glad I'm here. I'm not the principal, but I can fill her in. Or not, I don't know.
All right,
Thank you.
So back to the issue. Do you want a formal motion, or are you happy with us giving direction?
I think you can give direction at this point. We don't need a
Pardon?
formal. A consensus
So
is
everybody
good right
in
now.
favor with moving forward with the 2016 revision on the parks? That's unanimous, yes. So
Perfect.
there you
Thank
go.
you.
All right. Next item on our agenda is review of the 2017-18 proposed preliminary biennial budget. Ms. Gregory. And again, we're going over a number of areas tonight, and hopefully we'll get our questions asked. But as with past presentations, if questions do come up, please feel free to contact the city manager and get your questions answered so we can keep this moving forward. Ms. Gregory.
Oops. Hello again.
Hello.
Okay, let's see why this is not showing. Here we go. So tonight is our third segment of review of the general fund departments and the other funds that comprise the 2017-18 budget. And you can see tonight we have quite an assortment of topics to cover. Before we get started, I did want to follow up on a couple of questions that arose at our prior meetings. And one of those was posed by Councilmember Smith. You asked about the multimodal transportation funds that we saw in the street fund. So I tried to find out a little bit more about those, and in the 2015 Transportation Package, ESSB 5987, some new funds for cities and counties were provided from the state's Motor Vehicle Fund and the Multimodal Fund. So these are state funds, and they directed that some money be distributed directly to the city over and above the regular gas tax that the city receives. So for 2017, what that meant was, in addition to the fuel tax, of which we get $20.84 per capita, we would get $1.05 from the Motor Vehicle Fund per capita and 92 cents from this multimodal fund. And simply put, this is just additional resources for transportation issues in a broader sense than has been used in the past. I mean, it can be anything that's a public road, a ferry, aviation, rail, ports, bicycles, and pedestrian facilities, recognizing that there are more than one form of transportation, but that we would still continue to consider these restricted for transportation purposes, and that's why they are still in the street fund. So that amounts to about $44,000 a year to the city over and above what we'd been receiving in the current biennium. That's the best explanation of the multimodal distribution. And also, last week there was a presentation on the Surface Water Management Fund, and there was some apparent disagreement or misunderstanding about the budget that was presented and the increase, and I just want to reiterate that the slide that presented the Surface Water Management Fund and the revenue and expenditure information and the increase over the prior budget was in fact correct. And there wasn't the only typo was the year. 2015 should have been 2016, but the dollars and the percentage numbers presented were correct. So with that, we'll move into tonight's new material, and Debbie Bent will start this off with the Community Development Department in the General Fund.
Good evening again. So community development, what do we do? Well, our main focus is on long-range planning, comprehensive plan, looking out to the future, but as you've kind of heard tonight, we also do park planning and development, and part of that is project management and grant management. So working a lot with the comprehensive plan, looking to the future of what the city should look like in the future and how we get there, and part of that would be park development and implementation of those plans. So the preliminary budget is $1,715,000. It looks like a big increase. Well, it's a big increase because it was a small budget, so anytime you add to it, it looks really big, but I'll explain that. The budget is about 7% of the general fund. Part of the increase is due to the full-time employees. It was adding 2 park project managers. Although we've had a temporary park project manager since 2013, that was accounted for, as Joanne mentioned in her previously, in a different fund, not in the community development budget. So that part of the increase is in adding that park project manager position to the community development budget. That's Anne's position. And then also adding a second park project manager position to manage those projects as a result of the walkways and waterways park improvements. So aside from the 2 park project managers, there's myself, senior planner, Laurie Anderson, and we share the administrative assistant 50% with development services. I've already kind of spoken a little bit about the increase, which is a 57% increase in the salary or personnel costs associated with adding those 2 positions. And the other large increase in the budget is related to service costs. And the service costs are related to long-range projects that are either mandated that we have to do or that we really should do because it's been a while since we did them. So if you look at that, we would be looking at over the next couple of years, $370,000, which is a big number increase, but there's a reason for that, and I'll kind of walk you through that. So part of that would be looking at assigning some cost for consultant service support to update the Shoreline Master Program. I know it only seems like yesterday since you did that, and believe me, that was a long process, and it's not something I really want to do again.
It was just yesterday.
Feels like yesterday, doesn't it? But really, it's coming around again in the cycle, and the state deadline for updating that is 2019. Part of that update, we should also take a look again at critical areas and make sure if there's anything that we need to update to be in compliance. So that would be part of that. $200,000 would be consultant support to help us with any of the technical pieces that we need. $50,000 would be looking at updating the park impact fee study. When we updated the PROS plan in 2013, we did not update the impact fees. Like we did, if you remember, when we updated the transportation element, we then rolled right into looking at updating the traffic study and the impact fees. So we haven't done that since 2001, so it's about time that we took that on again. And again, that is the $50,000 is to get some consultant support to help us with the technical details needed to look at a new park fee study and park impact fees to update those. And again, the next $50,000 is looking at updating the PROS plan. And again, this is one of those things that you have to keep updating on a regular basis to make sure it's compliance with the state mandated deadlines, it's updated so that you're eligible for grants. And that is true for the PROS plan. So we adopted it in 2013, and we need to have it updated again by 2019 to be eligible for the 2020 grant cycle. So that's another reason, is to have the consultant support necessary to help us with those technical pieces that we might need. And RCO grants, again, those are on a 2-year cycle. It is an extensive effort to put together a grant application. And so we've allocated $30,000 for consultant support, and that is consistent with what we used when we applied for the grants in this recent funding round. The comp plan and development regulation update, each year you adopt a docket work program for updates to the comprehensive plan or associated development regulations. So depending on what those docket items are, we may need again some technical help from consultants. Also, I've assigned $20,000 there for park development support. If anything crops up, whether it's a title report or appraisals or something else where we need some outside help to put that together. So that's sort of the two main components of change in the community development budget are increase in personnel costs for adding those 2 FTEs to the budget and for consultant support to help with some of these major project updates due over the next biennium. Any questions?
Questions? Nope.
Okay, thank you. Well, Debbie will be back shortly.
It's a short road.
I'm sure she will.
I'll just sit up there.
Okay, the next fund. I'm trying to go in a somewhat logical order. So the Public Art Fund is the next fund for discussion, and
You're being surrounded.
I'm being surrounded. I have good support for this conversation, the Public Art Fund. This is where we try to capture 1% for municipal art from construction projects that the city, public works projects that the city takes on. So, you.
I'll begin. Good evening. The Kenmore Municipal Code, Chapter 3.50, has a nice, short, and concise description of the Public Art Fund and its uses. Selection, acquisition, installation, or display of visual art in public facilities or as part of a project. And this repair of public art pieces is also a legitimate use for these funds, as is performing arts events in public spaces. The main caveat in the code is that this fund is used just for those purposes of selecting or acquiring or maintaining public art, not for administrative staffing. And the fund source is 1% of the capital cost, meaning the construction contract is awarded by the council from city capital projects, ranging from buildings to sidewalks to surface water drainage projects. And the current fund balance, as you can see, is $67,849. And the preliminary budget that we'll discuss with you tonight is $61,000. So, as you know, for a number of years now, we have used public art funds every summer to make an acquisition from the Arts of Kenmore annual art show. And that's generally matched by the organization, and that has led to the acquisition of some very interesting art pieces that are around City Hall. We're doing, I think, a better job of getting them in public, more public spaces in the last couple of years. And then there are two proposals totaling $60,000 that Rob will describe.
Sure. Okay. Let's go to the next slide. So there's been some interest expressed in putting some sort of art on what we call the new church wall. That's the new large wall on the north side of the SR 522 West A project. So I asked artist Amberly Gall-Cully to come up with some concepts for that. And there's more detail on a link on the agenda that I'll click on in a minute, but I wanted to walk through a couple things with you first. So this next slide shows you what those metal cutouts could be, and that's what she's proposing is metal cutouts that would be attached to the wall, so they'd be like a couple inches off the wall. They wouldn't be painted on the wall or embedded into the wall. They'd be attached to the wall and be a couple inches off the wall. And then also there's been an idea to make this wall more interesting. This is a newly constructed wall within the last several years. This was part of the 181st, 61st intersection improvements. And this wall is, in some people's opinions, screaming for something interesting to be put on it. So there's an idea to do an etched aluminum figure of a mountain lion. Why a mountain lion? Because we're not in cougar country, right? That's Bothell or... Oh, Nancy, I'm sorry.
Joanne,
Yeah.
Oh, Joanne, I'm a cougar too, not their kind of cougar, but anyway, it's called Cat's Whiskers Road.
Be careful.
But it's called Cat's Whiskers Road because, as probably all of you know, back in the 1940s or so, there was a cougar that had been captured in the wild and was housed at where the Jack in the Box is now at I think it was a roadhouse of some sort. And sounds kind of cruel, but actually the story goes that this mountain lion was saved from some sort of imminent danger and rescued. So there's actually kind of a touching story that goes with it. And so to celebrate that story and that heritage and to remind people of why it's called Cat's Whiskers Road, and also some people call the creek there Cat's Whiskers Creek, the idea would be to put an aluminum etched drawing there on the wall. And here's a small version of what it could look like. This is kind of a miniature version, but the artist came up with this concept. And so this is aluminum, and so this is what the etched aluminum would look like.
How durable would that be?
I think pretty durable, about as durable as you can get. Yeah. Do you mind if I click to the...
Click away.
Need to go to the council bill. So the proposed budget for the church wall artwork is about $50,000. The artist is saying $50,000, but sales tax is not included, and she wants 20% leeway. Now I can direct her to keep it all within $50,000, period. On the On the 181st, 61st wall, however, it's a $10,000 proposed budget. She does want 20% leeway on that. What am I doing? I keep clicking on the wrong thing.
I'd help you if I knew.
Sorry, I should have done this before the meeting tonight. But I just want to go to more detail. Just right there. How do we get to that screen?
I don't know why not showing. Let's see.
Okay. Well, if you, on your city council agendas, if you can click on where it says Art Fund Proposal, you'll see more detail. And if you can click there and just follow along with me, because for some reason it's not showing up on the projector screen tonight. So what she would use to fabricate the metal for the church wall is what they call water jet fabrication. And so it would be a metal material that would be cut with water jets. And there's examples that you can see there on the first page. And
can I ask you a question?
Yeah, please.
Is this the same wall where, I remember it came up when during construction, what was going to, I believe this was the wall, and it was supposed to be vines
Yes.
that were going to grow, and they turn color during the fall. And I've seen them, and they're actually very beautiful in other areas where I've seen them. And I just wanted to make sure this is the same area we're talking about.
Yep, and so those vines have been planted, and they're just still really small, but they'll grow up and fill the wall eventually. The idea would be for the vines to grow up behind the metal pieces.
So with that, is it possible that a 4x8 sheet is pretty small for a cutout? And I was, just from the scale of the wall and knowing that it would have vegetation to compete with, it seems like the cut, I mean, I realize a sheet of plywood's a big sheet of plywood, but relative to the scale of the wall.
Are you talking about the church wall?
Yeah. Is that what you're talking about now?
Yeah, I am. The 4x8, is that?
Isn't it out of a 4x8? I thought I read that on here.
Yeah, I thought that was for the other wall.
Well,
but I could be wrong. Yeah, the 181st, 61st wall would have the 8x4 foot aluminum etched mural.
Yeah, it does say that if you look at on the second page of the agenda bill item, on the fourth paragraph, last sentence says the scale of the silhouettes on the wall will be cut from an 8x4 foot piece of metal. It just seems like something that could get buried very easily in a vegetation area.
Especially, on a big highway like that, it's really surprising how much scale you need for something to get noticed.
So, and that's actually my point. And by the time you cut it out, it's even going to be a lot smaller because obviously you have all the perimeter areas that aren't used.
So, you have the detail there. I just need direction from you on whether you're interested in pursuing this.
Councilmember Curtis, and then Councilmember Herbig, and then Councilmember Danuski.
Okay, so on this one, I agree. It felt like the pieces of art were too small compared to the size of it felt like the size of the art was too small compared to the size of the wall, and somebody would have to be out there clipping all the time to keep the green away from this. So it sounds like a great idea that it would grow up behind there, but that's not how green things really grow. Mm-hmm. They eat anything around them. So that would be extra maintenance to actually maintain those things. I think they would just get covered up. So either there'd have to be like one significant piece that you were willing to defend, but I wouldn't go for the whole bunch of little things to defend. And then if we could go to the other wall on 61st, I think is the... There. Oh, there. To me, that again feels horizontal, and the art piece is vertical. It doesn't feel like it's the right shape of art. Mm-hmm. Now, I could see, the mountain lion just sort of on that, like, from the pointy part, and then it kind of goes down, and then it kind of goes like this. I could see the mountain lion and kind of being big enough to be a big chunk of that, but the way it's designed, it's just not the right shape for the piece that we're trying to cover.
Maybe etched into the concrete instead of...
Maybe, but I don't mind the piece you have there. I think that would be durable, but I think it would, again, have to be big enough, substantial enough to be worth bothering doing, and I would just maybe do the cougar. I wouldn't try to create the tree and the eagle on top. That's what gets it out of proportion. I think you could do the cougar here and make it fit the shape that you're trying to put it in.
Councilmember Herbig.
I have a great amount of respect for Ms. Culley. I do have some worries, though, about all of our large art projects being done by the same person. The mural over at St. Vincent de Paul is great. It's been a huge, wonderful addition to the community, but I really do question us kind of having the same look throughout the city. I mean, that could be seen as a plus from a branding standpoint. Looks like Kenmore if we want that to be our look. But I also think on the flip side, I think it could be kind of detrimental. I would have rather this gone through some sort of public RFP or something to get some other proposals from other folks on kind of what, because people have different visions for this. I mean, these are two great places where we could do some really cool things. But I'd like to see some other ideas. And I'm not ruling this out completely. I would really love to see some other ideas.
Yeah, you definitely can still do that where you ask other artists to make proposals. This was more to give you some ideas of what could go there. Of course, this artist would love to be the selected artist, but you could say, yeah, this is worth pursuing, but let's do a request for proposals from different artists. On the church wall, just providing the other side of the argument on whether to do anything at all. The design that was done on the church, there is the other argument that the design and the lines on the other wall, if I can go back, make the wall interesting, and that the ivy that will grow up on it will also be sufficient to have an interesting wall. So one argument is that no art is needed on that wall.
Go ahead.
Councilmember Sperry was first on your list. But I'll go. So my main comment was the same as Councilmember Hervig. I like this artist a lot, but there are a lot of great artists here, and Art to Kenmore's here, and I would like to see some other ideas. And then another was on budget. If we did both of these, that would put our budget pretty low for public art, and we haven't quite nailed down what the town square art is going to be, so I was a little bit worried about spending all that money without knowing exactly what's going to be across the street either.
Yeah, we do have money in the budget for the town square art. We have $125,000 for that. So are you worried that it might even be more than $125,000 and you want some?
Yeah, I just want us to make sure that we think about that before, if it make sure that really is enough for the town square.
Councilmember Sperry.
Thank you. So specific to what we're calling the church wall, I question what the value of adding to it for a couple of reasons. One is it's basically a highway. I mean, to be really blunt about it, and it's in contrast for say something along the main street or where the current mural is, it doesn't feel like you would get that much out of it. So, and I'm fine with the way it is and everything. And I do share Councilmember Danuski's concerns about basically tapping out the budget for these. I mean, I appreciate you bringing something forward, but I don't really see a real push towards that. On the other one, I'm not as familiar with that other wall, and I would agree that one's pretty much a blank slate, but the first thing I thought of was it's so gray, and if there's something that cries out for color, that cries out for some color rather than just adding some black or something. So anyway, I'd like to see some more options before I make any decisions.
Councilmember Smith.
Okay, now I have to hit this from a very petty angle, but a very important angle, and that is Councilmember Curtis just referred to this as a cougar, even though it's a mountain lion in the bill. And everybody would be referring to it as a cougar. And even our city manager has discussed trying to change Bothell Way and to eliminate the Bothell thing. I can't imagine anything more disgruntling in this community than putting a cougar on a blank wall in Kenmore. So I have to say that.
So on the church wall, I was like to see some big sculpture there at some point. And so I think this part of this is because of that. But seeing the design on the finished wall and seeing the planting now that's starting to grow up that wall, I'm not convinced that wall really needs anything. But Councilmember Herbig.
I actually still think the church wall needs something. I thought that when it first started going up, that we were kind of leaving this huge, I don't know, it's just so blank. I'm not sure it gives the best impression to people driving to or from or through Kenmore. So I'm still interested in something there, and I actually think the idea of something kind of offset from the wall could be good. Frankly, I think if we just painted the blocks in different colors and then let the plants grow over it, it could be interesting too, and it might just cause us some paint. I think if we, just bright primary colors and let the plants go nuts. I think on the cat's whiskers wall, I think it'd be interesting actually to ask artists to build off the idea of cat's whiskers and see what comes in, because it is a huge piece of canvas just sitting right there. Something really interesting could be done. It is seen by a lot of people, especially Uplake neighbors that are exiting the neighborhood there. And I think there's a lot of potential for something interesting with paint there, frankly.
It's an interesting shape.
Yeah, it really is.
Something really cool with it that would fit the shape.
I mean, you can make mountains out of it. You can make a gigantic mustache. There's a lot of things you can do with that. That's the limits of my creativity. But there are people out there who can do better things than that. So,
Your Honor, so could we take it one wall at a time? Can I get direction from you one wall at a time? Is that okay?
Sure.
So on church wall, my first question is there interest in doing something on it?
See, church wall, my thought originally was the salmon over in Factoria off of I-90, but salmon had been done too much. So anyway, something big. But
so
anyway.
Can I get a direction on that first question? Is there interest in doing something on the church wall?
Yes.
1, 2.
Oh, no, mine was a comment. It's not.
Go ahead, comment.
So I'm happy just to leave it. We paid a lot of money to get those grooves and that design designed into that wall. Tens of thousands of dollars, more than the art fund, I'm sure. I'm happy just to let it go green and then red as the fall happens.
So I'm seeing two.
Who else got comments here? No other comments? Okay.
Hands for who wants to leave it alone?
Sure. Okay, I got 4 wanting to leave it alone. Okay. All right, so that takes us to the next wall. Is there any interest in doing something there?
Yes.
Oh, okay. All right. And then so if we do something there, would you like to ask for proposals from different artists? Okay. All right.
I think that, having multiple designs would be helpful.
Yeah. And knowing that the church wall is out of the equation might have a little more flexibility on the budget for this wall.
I do have a question here about the budget. So it looks like there's no contributions from capital projects. Is that what's next? So what's that about? We've obviously had some.
I was going to take that.
Please.
I'll take that because that's my responsibility. We haven't been funding it lately, and one of the things I want to do in the new year is go back over the projects we constructed and where they didn't incorporate art into their project, figure out what their contribution should have been.
Okay, so
sort of
many of them already have the art in it. Okay.
A lot of projects do already have the art in it, but I haven't been as diligent about keeping up with that as I should. Nobody jumps up and says, take my art money, because they're trying to spend it on their project. But we are committed to doing that. So I suspect that fund will go up some.
Oh, okay.
I can't say how much, but I think there are some contributions overdue.
Well, I had forgotten that so often we include the art in the capital project. So, because all I could think of, where I was coming from was there's obviously been some capital projects, and so that's why it's so. But that's good to know that there might be some more to work with.
So, if, for instance, the railing. So if you upgrade from a run-of-the-mill railing for $10,000 per segment, and you go with an artistic one for $20,000, is that considered an investment in art, or is that just considered an investment in the capital improvement?
You can count it as art.
I think you could.
I don't know how how will you do that? Would you have to go through then when you're looking back at these other projects, Joanne? Do you have to?
Well, oftentimes they'll specify in their budgets how much they've set aside for art,
Okay.
and then it's a matter of understanding how they applied it and what they used it for. Because I think the railings out on some of these intersections were included in the art budget for 522.
Yes, they were, and the lights.
Because
those color changes.
And the
That's
maple
what I was
leaves.
The
and
maple leaves and the
Right.
lightsabers. Mhm.
Okay.
I'm
thank
thinking more, I know 522 incorporated art. It gets a little tricky when you have a sidewalk project or, some of the small ones, and really how nitpicky do we want to be, and is it every project? And it's been kind of a difficult call, but we're going to try and take that on.
Town Square project, for example, has more than 1% for art going back into the project.
Absolutely.
But we have the 181st Street sidewalks. I don't know that we're contributing to art for those, so we probably need to do that.
And you'll recall during the City Hall design and construction, we had there had been a number, I think it was 129,000 that had been identified, but then the construction bid came in so much lower, but the council decided to leave that 129 in for the public art.
Right.
Yeah, Councilmember Sperry.
Thank you. I can tell people are getting tired. When you said 181st, that reminded me of a project I'd like to see, public art, the back of the Safeway. That, and I've said it before, but I just want to repeat it, is because remember how we want to have businesses and storefronts and looking at people? Well, the back of Safeway is never going to have that, but it could be painted.
Oh, yeah.
You could have shops.
Well, that would
you
be
could
fun.
have kind of a cool, get Main Street.
That would be really cool. That would be neat. Yeah.
All right.
Any more conversation regarding public art?
I hope not.
It's always the most interesting conversation. Now we're just going to go back to the numbers.
Sort of beat this one to death.
We're going in depth tonight. Each
Yeah.
week.
All right.
Okay. The next fund under consideration is the Park Impact Fee Fund. You all don't need to leave.
We're here for you.
You don't need to leave. Who's going to? Are you going to take on the rest of the funds? Kenmore Village Strategic.
Yeah, I'll definitely be talking about
Okay.
Kenmore Village.
So the next one would be the Park Impact Fee Fund. As you know, revenues from this revenues are received from new development for projects related to or that would benefit from new construction. So, for instance, the 2016 Park Impact Fee for a single-family residence is currently $2,565. This will be the fees that we will be studying in the next biennium that Debbie discussed in her budget. So those fees have not changed for some time. So the projected revenue for this fund in the current biennium has been reduced to the level that it was before 15-16, which I still believe was an extraordinary biennium, to $412,000, and we'll be utilizing about $754,000 of expenditures and transferring those to Park Capital Fund for Tolt, Morelands, Rhododendron, and Squires Landing improvements. We estimate that the ending fund balance will still be about $819,000. So this is just one of those funds that gathers resources until needed, and then they're transferred to the projects.
I have a question if you're done on that.
Yes, sure, anytime.
Mayor, if I may. So is the CPIW, is that like about 2% now? Or would you know approximately what that amount is?
The CPIW for the Seattle region, for the June measure was 2%, yes.
Okay, so if we were to increase that, do we have to go through a whole public hearing process and everything because it's an impact fee, or how does that work?
No, actually, in some years, although not every year, we have increased the park impact fees by a cost of living index, but we have chosen not to do that in the last few years, and that would be through the fee resolution.
Okay, and the reason I bring it up, and it's actually consistent, my thought is the same with the transportation impact fee too, is that, I mean, our costs are going up significantly, and I think it's reasonable to just automatically make it a policy to increase it annually with that index. And I'm sure one of the reasons it was put on hold might have been when we were in the, kind of recessionary times, but we're not in those times, and our costs are going up extraordinarily high, and this seems like a reasonable measure to take, especially when we look at our parks budget, we look at our transportation improvement plan, and our costs are going up dramatically. So it's just something that I've been thinking about.
Would that be something you'd want to review and make a decision on each year as we bring forward the fee resolution?
Well, actually, and I realize that could be part of it, but this was one of the things I was thinking also of maybe discussing at the retreat. But I'm not opposed to making it an automatic adjustment. Since the index is what costs are, it seems reasonable. And it seems like our costs are even higher than that index is, significantly.
Councilmember Sperry, no, there's a lot of nods for that, Brandon.
In a good way or a bad way? I didn't
Good
see.
way.
Okay.
There was a lot of positive nods. Councilmember Sperry.
I actually was under the impression that was done automatically, because that was the way it was written, so.
It had been done automatically prior to the recession.
Yeah, okay, so maybe it's just a matter of, as Councilmember Smith thought, is now that we're in a little different pattern to get back to it.
So there were four, at least, nods there to include that. So how do you want to handle that?
Would you want to include it for 2017? We just passed the...
I think that was the general idea, yes, 17, 18, and foreseeable future.
We just passed the fee thing, though, right? Fee resolution.
We did. We can still adjust it. And I think the index we used previously was the October CPIW index. But if you'd like to raise it for 2017, based on that index, I'm happy to do that.
As long as we revisit it in
the
18, for the 18 adjustments, right?
Do you want to do it for 17 and 18, or just 18? I'm confused.
I would propose that we do it for this biennium budget for both years.
Okay.
For the biennium. Councilmember Herbie.
I'm sorry, I'm just trying to clarify. So what we're talking about is adding some sort of CPI for this next budget, but then we would also be doing a study into what the park impact fees should be. So we'd be adding a CPI in this budget, evaluating and probably raising them again, and then setting them to some sort of automatic adjustment going forward. Is that what I'm hearing?
Likely. Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Okay.
Can do that.
Wonderful.
Any other questions about park impact fees?
I would just comment, whatever paperwork you put that in, we're not, so like adding a new tax or a new fee, we're reinstituting something we used to do, and we took it away for a good reason. So we're just reinstituting our previous policy. To me, there feels like a subtle difference.
That's true. We are instituting a previous policy, and at any time when it comes back to you in the fee resolution, you can always choose not to increase it at that time.
But we're also just keeping up with inflation.
Yes.
Right, that's it. I mean, it's a static fee, and everything else is increasing, and so it seems reasonable.
Okay.
And these are only fees on new construction, right?
Yeah.
Right, so.
That's right. The next fund under review is the Real Estate Excise Tax Fund, and this is the fund that collects the 0.5% tax on real estate transactions. Those monies are restricted for capital purposes, and they're contained in this fund, and they can be used for either park or transportation capital projects. The fund going into 2017 has about $1.5 million already. We project that taxes and some investment interest will bring in about $1.4 million, and disbursements from the fund are programmed for a variety of purposes. $200,000 is programmed to go back to the Strategic Opportunities Fund, because in 2015 we borrowed against the Strategic Opportunities Fund to advance some match money for sidewalk grants, and that was about $560,000, and made a commitment to pay it back out of real estate excise tax over a period of 4 years. So this is the first payback. $380,000 would transfer to the Park Capital Fund to support the Moorlands project. And then there are 6 transportation capital funds which would be funded with some real estate excise tax, including $900,000 of this money for overlay. With all of that activity, the fund balance at the end of 2018 is projected to be $856,000. Are there any questions about this fund?
Questions? Thank you.
Okay, so now we will move to the Park Capital Fund, and I'll turn it back to Debbie.
So I believe you had a presentation in October that went over the proposed projects in the capital fund. So a lot of this will be familiar, so I will go through quickly. The Park Capital funds Park Capital Improvement Project expenditures with resources from a number of funds. Looking at the budget, the revenue is over $4 million, and for revenues, and the fund budget is equivalent to that. One thing to point out is the expenditures do not include budget for the St. Edward Ballfield project yet. So the ending fund balance would be around $259,000. The budget highlights would be funding 9 park development projects in several parks, and those are outlined on this slide. And the next few slides outline more of the specifics for each project. Twin Springs plan, the budget includes an allotment to allocation of $40,000 to prepare and implement a park use plan, and that is funded from the King County levy funds. The Tolt Pipeline Trail will be under construction, or constructed, I should say, in 2017. And we have almost $207,000 allocated for that project, with funds from the King County levy funds and impact fee funds. The Moorlands Park project, which we kind of described what the components of that project would be, the budget is a little over $1.5 million, and again with a variety of funds. The Rhododendron Park Boardwalk project, again, is a 2017-18 project, and we kind of went over that today. The Rhododendron Park float, we touched on a little bit. It's a separate project in the CIP, and we would hope to try and get that under construction in 18, if possible. And similarly for the Squires Landing Park float, it's funded in the park in the CIP program, and we would then hope to be under construction in 17 if we can align all the agency permits up. So again, these are projects which are moving forward in the next couple of years. The Squires Landing Park Waterfront and Log Boom Park Waterfront are the 2 other projects funded by the Waterways and Walkways bond measure, and in 17 and 18 the funding for that would be allocated towards design and permitting in this next biennium. The St. Edward's Park ball field, all familiar with that. We've been working hard on the design and permitting and the lease negotiations, and would hope to get the permits wrapped up in 17 and construction in 18. And you can see there that the budget has got to be determined. So more to come on that, I guess, in the first quarter of 2017. And Rob's waving at me.
Yeah, one of the reasons why we don't have a
budget for you yet, as it continues to be a moving target. Negotiations with state parks continues to evolve. Just last week, we had a couple of parks commissioners ask us to take a look at a hybrid turf system, which is a combination of natural grass and synthetic grass. Sounds good, but we're finding that it's only available in national sports stadiums. So we're chasing down that little tangent there, and we'll find out how much it costs and stuff, and we'll get back to parks. And so it's things like that where we keep going on these little goose chases. But I feel like we are getting closer and closer to something with them.
A bigger rabbit hole?
Maybe. So anyway, that's part of the reason why you don't see any defined numbers there for the budget.
But we got some money for it.
Yeah. Do you want to tell the group if they haven't seen that already?
Well, if you haven't seen it, Councilmember Dembowski has managed to procure $611,000. And the $111,000 over the $500,000 was sort of paying us back for the rent that we paid for a construction easement on the Burt Gilman Trail. So
for the West A project.
And West B.
And my understanding, the funding source is the Kingdome debt finally paid off. So that money gets to go to build community parks now.
And the reason that happened was the meeting that we had here, where Councilmember Dembowski was at. There was families and children here that were speaking in favor of the ball fields, and that really impressed him. So he went to bat, unbeknownst to us, and gathered some money. So anyway.
Any other comments or questions regarding park capital?
Thank you.
Okay, great. So the next fund is the Strategic Reserve Fund. This is our rainy day savings account, or I call it the fund it and forget about it. It contains a balance of $1,294,000, and we last funded this in 2009 because it's restricted to $3.375 per $1,000 of assessed valuation. So when we reached our peak in 2009 and assessed value dropped after that, we were not able to add to it anymore. Well, 2016 will be the first year we can start to add back to it under this statutory guideline. So I am projecting for 2017 and 18 $20,000 of investment interest, and I'm going to go back and recalculate the fund because I believe we'll be able to add interest to it in 2010 or 2016 as well. If we were to fund it to its maximum value, we could bring it to $1,463,000 based on the 2017 preliminary assessed value. But that's a decision council would make. As you can see, though, that we have no expenditures program for this fund. We have never drawn anything from it to date.
One thing to note on this fund is there are no state restrictions on this fund. All restrictions on this fund are self-imposed by the city. The reason there's this limit on it is because we have the word rainy day, and the state limits how much money you can put into a rainy day fund. On the Strategic Opportunities Fund, which is a different fund, we originally had rainy day to describe the fund, but it was too much money, and so the auditors made us remove the term rainy day from Strategic Opportunities Fund.
But looking at strategic reserve, it's kind of a drop in the bucket if we really needed it in an emergency.
Well, true, very true. I don't know. It may be one of those outdated sort of restrictions that I can't begin, I don't understand, I can't explain it, but it's there.
Councilmember Herbig.
But
Have we put any thought of just getting rid of the words rainy day, in the name of the fund? Kind of opening that up for us a bit?
haven't considered that.
You could, but it is nice to think of I mean, this is a policy decision on your part, but it is nice to think of a fund as untouchable rainy day. And if you define it as that, then the state tells you how much you can put in it. You still have the Strategic Opportunities Fund.
Well, right, but as the mayor just pointed out, I mean, in the grand scheme of things, if we hit really hard times, having $1.2 or $1.4 million isn't going to, it's not going to be enough if we really hit a bad recession. It might make sense to change the name so we can put something, we can still give it some sort of very ominous sounding name that we never want to touch, but statutorily allow us to put to sock some more money aside for, what's another word for rainy day? I'm not sure. But I don't know, it just seems like a really weird artificial limitation for something that we should be socking away more money for in case things turn south.
I mean, a major earthquake could deplete that fund in a day.
Well, certainly it could, that and other resources too. If you didn't have the fund, you'd be that much further behind. Yeah. Some folks have revenue stabilization funds for economic ups and downs. We have our strategic opportunities for unbudgeted, unanticipated investments we might want to make.
We also have much higher than average fund balances. We have $6 million in our operating funds. In cash, in our savings accounts, if you will.
And there's no requirement to have a rainy day fund, but I think most cities do in one form or another. It's just that it's peculiar that if you call it out as that and establish it as that, it is restricted to the assessed valuation.
I would just like to make sure that it was something that we couldn't, that by policy didn't touch unless it was really a big emergency.
Well, that's been kind of the expectation. I mean, it would truly have to be a disastrous chain of events, not necessarily an economic downturn, but an emergency that required use of the money.
Councilmember Curtis.
So I guess I'm looking at it a little bit different than maybe some of the others on the council. I think we should keep a strategic reserve fund, rainy day fund. I don't think we should fund it higher than we're already doing. And my reason is if we have a couple $100,000 extra, I'd rather put it in the Strategic Opportunities Fund because then we can use it in more ways and we can put it in and out. Whereas this one is just too restrictive. So I'm glad to have something there, but I wouldn't necessarily fund it higher because then it feels sort of stuck there. And I would rather have the flexibility of using out of a fund and then paying back to the fund. So I'm happy just to leave that one there as it is and not fund it up to its full $1.4 million.
How do you feel about adding interest to it?
I'm okay with adding interest to it. Yeah.
Okay.
All right, anything else? Thank you.
Thank you. The next fund under review is the Strategic Opportunities Fund.
I'll begin the discussion on this fund. As you know, it was created in 2013 to take advantage of key investments and when things pop up that are not anticipated. It's been used for those purposes. For example, in this current biennium, this fund was used to fund some safety improvements for sidewalks and streets, and also for public input for the eventual ballot measure that was passed just recently. So the expenditures that are in the preliminary budget for this coming biennium are less than they were in the 15-16, and they are funding the Kenmore Business Incubator and the Rhododendron Park Float that you just heard about in the Park Capital Fund. One thing that's different about the incubator, and I'll take this opportunity to talk a little bit about that program, is that we're doing really quite well on lease and client fees right now. And you can never expect that that's always going to stay at a certain level. Right now, the incubator space is pretty much at capacity. We have room for maybe 1 or 2 more workstations. Plus, we're adding what we call the virtual clients to our client load. So that has created a situation where our operating kind of the net cost in a kind of typical month is more around just over $5,000 per month. We have allowed for in the proposed budget some expenditures to, number one, increase the program consultants' hours by about 4 hours a month. He's doing a great job, and we could use a little bit more of his time. We had not also budgeted for the IT services that Lighthouse provides for the city, and so we've allowed for a little bit of funds for that. And then you recall that as a city we have a contract for fiber installation to City Hall and the hangar, and also to the incubator, which is really a great need for the companies that we're working with. And so that is an extra cost. It's amortized over a 5-year period, but it's still a new cost. But every biennium since 2013 that the business incubator has been in operation, the budgeted amount has gone down, and this coming biennium is no exception to that. So we started out at $238,000 in that first biennium, and obviously there were a lot of startup expenses. It was $226,000 in the current biennium, and we're projecting $220,000 for 17 and 18.
If I may, I'd like to say a few more things about the Strategic Opportunities Fund. So the 2016 projected ending fund balance for strategic opportunities is $1.9 million, and the projected ending fund balance at the end of the 17-18 biennium will also be $1.9 million. So in other words, we're projecting to put in the fund about what we'll be taking out of the fund. In addition, we mentioned this before, it depends on how much of a magician Joanne is, but we believe we'll be able to strengthen that fund even more right after the first of this coming year through better than anticipated revenues and expenditures in the general fund. My goal is right after January or right after 2017 starts is to get it back up to the original $2.5 million. And she's not falling out of her chair or anything. Mm-hmm. So that's a good sign. So I'd love to get it back to the original $2.5 million right after the first of the year. And then if our projections are right, it would have $2.5 million at the end of the biennium. So one policy question you might want to ask yourself is, how much longer is the incubator going to be in the Strategic Opportunities Fund? When do you want to put it in the general fund? When we were trying to get the budget, the general fund balanced, and we were cutting things and rolling up our sleeves, I made the call to keep it in Strategic Opportunities because I there were things I was cutting, and I didn't want to add one more thing back to the general fund. Keep putting it in the general fund makes our revenues and expenditure line crosses cross sooner. And, our projections show the general fund revenues and expenditures crossing and meeting. So it's really a policy discussion. You don't have to give us direction on that tonight if you don't want to. It could be something that we talk about during the year in 2017. Could the general fund handle this incubator budget and still be balanced? Yes, in this biennium, yes, but it'll be close. So right now, this budget shows us underspending our general fund revenues by a couple $100,000. So bringing in the incubator would make the revenues and expenditures almost dead even.
You got Councilmember Smith and then Councilmember Curtis.
So I kind of like that idea of moving it to the general fund. And one of the reasons I like it is because it makes you have to really love it that much more rather than operating out of a fund that has a huge surplus. I think it makes you have to think about it and analyze it a little more. And so just so I know, Nancy, can you just confirm, basically there's no other expenses or revenues, because if you look at then what's in the budget, so you've got 220 for the biennium in the expenses, and then 60,000 for the leases. So it's 160,000 net loss over the biennium, as I see it. Is that correct? And as far as, like you said, it's occupied almost to maximum. Is there any ability to get any additional rent, or is that counterproductive with the whole concept of being an incubator?
We haven't changed the lease rates in the space since 2013. Yes, of course, we could take a look at that. As you're aware, we were also successful in getting some grant funds to kind of augment the services provided for the Port of Seattle grant, and also we have been bringing in, like I said, about $3,000 a month in client fees, and we're actually adding some virtual clients that were in this last training session that just ended about a week ago. So I was pretty conservative in budgeting what the client fees would be, because you never know.
Right.
A company says, "Okay, we're ready to leave now," and then you have some vacant space for maybe 2 or 3 months. And so I didn't want to be overly optimistic about projecting the client fees.
Okay. No, and so I guess to wrap up what my thought was, I know our budget's looking tighter and tighter, and it is 160,000 of negative, and that makes you think of, you look across the board and you look at things, what catch, I've got a list of a few of them that catch my eye, and that's one of them, because you realize it's harder to quantify what the benefit is, and it's extremely hard at times. And so anyway, I actually kind of like the idea of moving it to the general fund.
And you can direct us to do that tonight if you want.
I would rather have a deeper discussion about it. I think it would be better, maybe even at the retreat or something.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
But because I think I don't have a problem with changing anything where we're at right now. I do think it is something that we need to discuss more.
Councilmember Curtis and Councilmember Sperry.
So a couple of questions. Was it or has it been put into the priority-based budget where it has been scored against other things? And if so, where did it score? Kind of which of the quartiles?
It was scored as a program of the city manager's department.
Do you want to?
If you could look it up and let us know later.
Yeah.
It's not crucial. But I'm also inclined to not have it stay in this fund. So as I remember, it was sort of a pilot. It was kind of, hey, let's check this out and see if it'll work. We think it has some benefit. But at a certain point, it's been around long enough, we think we're probably going to keep it. I think it needs to be part of our regular budget, not in this Special Opportunities Fund. So I'm inclined to, sooner than later, moving it over to general fund.
Councilmember Sperry?
Just briefly, I actually would support keeping it in the Strategic Opportunities Fund because it's not like a park we have to maintain or the new hangar building that we have to maintain. It really is something optional. And so it gives, it could easily be cut. But I also appreciate, having a larger discussion about it at a later date.
Councilmember Herbig?
I'm fully in favor of scooting it over to the general fund and make it compete more one-on-one with the rest of our projects rather than kind of be off to the side. I think if it's in the general fund and we're looking at that versus a lot of our other priorities, it may put it into a different picture and we may have to reconsider things a little bit. Not that I'm saying I'm against it, I'm not, but I really think it should be competing with everything else now that it's been there for a few years.
If I may, I think having a discussion, if it's at the retreat or whenever, this is really the biennium. I think for us to have some pretty clear-eyed observations about where this goes. We have a really good advisory group, and we met with them just a few weeks ago, and I said to them, "This is what I'd like to work with you on this coming year too. About are there grants? Are there examples from other cities? I sure know of some that started out as a totally city-driven program, but over time it." Kind of transitioned to being operated by a nonprofit and still had some city support. So there are a lot of things that we can be talking about with this.
Councilmember Herbig?
Can I say one more thing? One thing we've been meaning to do is have a policy, a council-adopted policy, to go with the Strategic Opportunities Fund. Talks about why it's there, how to use the money, how to replenish it. And we actually have had a draft policy for quite a while that we just haven't gotten around to bringing to you. So we would like to bring a draft policy for you to take a look at, I think on the 5th, and then ask you to adopt it based on any changes you give us on the 12th. Yeah, of December. Mm-hmm.
So can you make sure that I get to see that before I head out?
Sure, we can get it all to you tomorrow. It's ready to go.
And then I have a question. I don't know where this question fits, but it came up this past week, and I'm just curious. The 45,000 plus the 15,000 we've gotten out of Frontier, where's that been put?
I'm sorry?
The settlement from Frontier Communications, where's that been put? What's it been used for?
You know what we're talking about?
No.
Liquidated damages.
I haven't seen it yet.
From a few years ago.
You haven't seen any of it? Okay.
Well, we'll get back to you because we did get some. We got a couple years ago.
5,000 a couple of years ago.
Oh, a couple years ago?
And then
I thought you meant now.
No, and 15 more that's coming.
I haven't seen it the last week or two. I'm sorry.
Actually, it's legitimately 30 for this.
Okay, so
recent one.
45 and 30.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just curious where it's.
Okay, if it came in years ago.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm sure it went into the general fund.
Okay, fine.
Mm-hmm.
Because
we would
legal-
do the same thing this year.
Legal fees were paid out of the general fund, so we had to. Yeah.
I thought I missed something like last week or.
No.
Yeah, we got all this money while we were in San Francisco.
Like I said, I didn't know where it fit. I just wanted to ask it. So
Okay, I'm sorry. All right, thank you. The next fund is the Kenmore Village Fund, and I believe
right.
Rob
Yeah.
will
I'll
take this one.
Take this. So you may, I hope you remember or know that This was the fund, had a different name years ago, Capital something.
Capital Projects Fund.
Capital Projects Fund. It was the fund by which you all purchased the Kenmore Village properties, the 9.5 acres. So a while back, it handled multiple properties and multiple tenants. For this next biennium, it'll be down to 2 properties and 2 tenants. The one tenant being the post office and the other tenant being the retailer in the hangar building. And so that's what it's down to. It's actually a fund where both capital and operations happens out of it. The capital piece, or at least the big capital piece, will be wrapping up this year and into the beginning of next year. And so starting in 17 and 18, we're really getting into the operations of the town green and continuation of operations of the post office building. So in your budgets, you'll see the revenues. If you look on page 168 of your budgets, you'll see the projected revenues coming in there. And then on page 169 are the projected expenditures. A lot of this will be getting up and going with the town square and the community building. We have programming in there, including the Why I Love Kenmore event and the summer movies, and facility scheduling software and advertising and all those good things. We also have janitorial services in there, as you can see on page 169 of your budget. And we also have rental revenue assumed in both 17 and 18 from our tenants. We have $125,000 from art. That's funded from the general fund. And there will be a general fund subsidy for ongoing operations of that fund. We're estimating high in the first couple of years. I think as we get going, I think we'll narrow down those numbers and have better estimates for you for the next biennium. But for now, we're budgeting pretty conservative on the operating costs of the town square and town green. And all three of those bullets I've already covered. So, any questions on Kenmore Village Fund? One question I have for you is, does the name Kenmore Village have a place in this town anymore?
Not anymore.
Kenmore Village? No?
Nope.
Because we've got the town square, we've got the link at Spencer Square, and we've got Spencer 68. So what's Kenmore Village anymore, right? What I'd like to do is zoom out and brand the bigger picture, which is downtown Kenmore. And I've gotten different ideas like Kenmore Commons. I don't really like that, and that copies Sammamish, so I don't want to copy Sammamish. But we can talk about it more, not tonight, but I'm kind of landing on just downtown Kenmore and really telling that story, because if you think about all the pieces that have come together in the last 6 years, it's a really pretty cool story that we need to bring together in one story and share and brand.
I would still say there's a lot of work, though, to be done on 181st to make it that walkable street that's like fun and a reason to come down here.
That's part of that story.
Somehow it needs to expand east-west.
That's part of that zoom out that I'm talking about, yeah.
Anything else? Thank you.
Okay, that brings us to the Swamp Creek Basin Fund. All right, this fund is where we account for and track what is left of the memorandum of agreement with King County that was executed by the city in 2000, where $10,750,000 was provided for surface water projects, and a requirement is contained in that agreement to maintain a permanent maintenance trust fund in the amount of $1,290,000 plus interest. Anything over and above that can be spent. 2 years ago, I believe, we used some of the excess funds for dredging Swamp Creek. Right now, I compute that we've got about $89,000 that's available for projects or work in Swamp Creek. But that's the primary purpose of this fund. And I know that there have been conversations over the last few years about taking another look at this agreement to see if we could free up this money and not keep it restricted and sitting in our cash drawer, not producing anything. I can't tell you the answer to that. We would need to get some legal advice in looking at that agreement with King County. But, if that's the direction we want to go, we can certainly do that.
It's been on our back burner to-do list, but it is $1.4 million that we could put to work on improving stormwater quality and flooding reduction.
Comments, questions? Councilmember Herbrigman, Councilmember Sperry.
Just out of curiosity, would the larger part of Squires Landing be considered part of the Swamp Creek Basin?
I believe so.
Could we use this money to match some of the Army Corps funds that we've been talking about on and off? To deal with invasive species?
Well, if it became available, I mean, this money is supposed to provide maintenance for the projects that were constructed with the other proceeds, the other $9 million.
Like the dredging?
Like the dredging, I'm trying to think back to all those years when they constructed, there was a bridge.
Yep.
73rd Avenue.
73rd Avenue Bridge. So that could happen if there was some way to amend or rescind the agreement.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, the dredging I was referring to had to do with that construction of the 73rd Street Bridge, that area.
Yeah, most of that was spent before I even arrived here. We have a list of those projects, but from what I can see, the the agreement is clear that this money will be set aside for that purpose. But I guess anything is open to renegotiation, and we could have a conversation with the county about that.
So I do have a question on that. So if we used it for the dredging, so every some number of years, I'm sure we'll have to dredge again. Does it say there's a lower limit that we can go down to, or as long as we're using it for this project and we're using it for maintenance, that we can use it to fund up?
We used what was the excess over and above the minimum amount we had to keep in the fund.
Okay, so there is a minimum. You can't go below it.
Correct.
All right. In ways, this acts like a backup strategic reserve fund. If truly there was an emergency of catastrophic proportions, we'd take the money and use it and discuss it with King County later. One could argue.
But the dredging is in Swamp Creek, that area there, so they ain't got nothing to do with it.
Use it now and apologize later.
Just one quick unrelated side note. Hey, Debbie, we're going to come and bring back the Army Corps of Engineers proposal to City Council on the 5th of December. Is that right?
I believe on the 5th on the staff report.
Yeah, so we'll talk to you about that on the 5th.
Councilor Swery.
So on this fund, the Swamp Creek Basin Fund, I know that the dredging needs to happen. It's a big in the Swamp Creek. I guess it's called a sedimentation pond.
Yeah.
But and that needs to happen. And so I was confused by how little it seemed like of the fund we could use to do that at this point. And so it would be interesting to see if there's is there sort of kind of, to borrow your term, the sweet spot, is there an amount that we could spend on the dredging that would still have like enough interest or something like that, so we would get that, where we wouldn't have to keep adding money to it to pay for this ongoing maintenance. So,
Well, my understanding is the minimum amount to be kept in the fund is that it was 12% basically, $1.2 million, plus the interest associated with that $1.2 million. And any interest that had accumulated in the fund over and above that, you could spend.
mm-hmm. It almost seems
But this
like
was a permanent maintenance fund.
right. It almost seems like if you could renegotiate it just so you could use the interest, that would solve a lot of this, because then you could, you would still have something there and you could still pay for this ongoing. Because eventually, I mean, if we just spend it all, we still have the pond to dredge or the sedimentation thing to dredge. So,
Well, I think in the days that this was negotiated, interest was it was expected that you would use the interest back in when we were earning 5 or 6 or 7% interest,
so that's
not
the difference.
half of 1% interest. So that's why it's been building up again very, very slowly.
okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, it doesn't build up fast enough to actually do us any good.
No.
You get stuck there and you can't use it.
Councilmember Smith.
Yeah, interesting.
So if we could, so the dredging is currently paid out of the surface water management fund, right?
Correct.
So even if we could get them to agree to allow us just to use even the principal towards the dredging costs, then that would free up money in a much larger fund to have other options for.
Yeah, it seems like it's worth a conversation, definitely.
Well, if you would like us to pursue that and have reopen that conversation, and I see that you do, then, then we'll do that.
When you've got lots of extra time.
Moving right along.
Moving right along is our last fund. Oh, thank you. You were going to help me, weren't you?
Yes, please.
Equipment Replacement Fund. So this is our sinking fund for future replacement of certain assets, including vehicles and computers and some furniture. So individual operating departments and users are charged on a prorated basis for their share of computers, their use of vehicles, et cetera. They contributed to this fund. We've built up a balance, and from this we replace our trucks, replace our computers, replace our servers, et cetera. So in this year, 2017-18, we anticipate about $119,000 of expenditures. We will bring in from the operating departments almost $211,000, so we should end the biennium with just over $500,000.
Councilmember Smith?
Yeah, I think since this is a sinking fund, it should be part of the Swamp Creek Basin Fund.
That was awesome.
Very good. So any questions about this fund?
Nope.
Okay, so that's great. Next week, okay, there's a couple more opportunities to talk budget in case there are issues that come up or questions that you have. Next week, the 28th, we'll have the final hearing, public hearing on the budget. Okay. Just a hearing, though, not the approval. But we will also need to pass the 2017 property tax levy.
On the 28th.
On the 28th. But if there are other items that come up for budget discussion, we could talk about those next week or on December 5th, because I have nothing specific scheduled as far as budget presentations. And then on December 12th, we will bring you the ordinance to amend the 15-16 budget and approve the 17-18 budget.
So if there's anything you're wrestling with or want to change in what's been proposed so far, I think a week from tonight would be a really good night to bring it up. So, for example, there was a request for us to increase the amount of money we'll be contributing to Arch and Capital. Is that something you'd like to do? Are you satisfied with the $30,000 that I'm proposing? Would you like to put more in? Other than that, I'm not really hearing.
The impact fee.
And the transportation impact fee. I know we didn't cover that this evening, but I can bring it up next week if you want, but that would be my intent.
Yeah, and we can, I don't know that we need that for the budget. We can just do it as a fee increase. Let's see, what else? Oh, there is a request that Nancy had to leave, but I believe next week there's a request that came in late for about $10,000 to do a mobile app for the 73rd Avenue mural.
Oh, yeah.
And we're going to be talking to you about that, I believe, on the 28th or the 5th, and whether you want to add that last minute in the budget, because that's not in the budget.
Could we take that out of the art fund?
Yeah. Yeah.
The seniors made a request, or the senior center.
The seniors made a request.
3,000, yeah.
And that's in, but the Heritage Society also made a request for website, and that's in this budget. So two things that aren't in, and I need your direction, and we'll tell you more about this app, but the app is one of those things that's not in. And the other thing is the capital contribution to Arch. Need your direction on that. It'd be great to get that in a week. If there's anything else out there in the budget that you're wanting to change, let us know.
We'll bring those questions to you this week.
Also, one thing we need to get in the budget is the 2017-2018 employee salary plan. Where we're at on that is the work done by Cabot Dow Associates is complete. We do have a draft plan that I'd like to email to you tomorrow and give you a week to chew on it. And if there's anything about that plan that you want to give me direction on, we can do that in a week on Monday night. I do want to give employees a chance to comment on it as well. So what I'll do is I'll email the salary plan to you tomorrow, give you a week to look at it, get any direction from you that you might want to bring up on Monday night, and then I'll have the employees look at it. And then based on employee input and everything, we'll bring back a final version of the salary plan to you on the 12th as part of budget adoption. So.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Staff report.
So there's an executive session on personnel tomorrow night at 6 o'clock. Food will be provided. Also on December 1st, the evening of December 1st, I believe 7 o'clock, but I'll confirm that, is a kind of a celebration of Sound Transit 3, and especially celebrating the 522 Transit Now yellow shirt people. Yeah. So we really want to get some folks there. It'd be great if you could come. I hope you've seen the email on it and the invitations about it. So it'd be really great if you, as the council, could come and express thanks, because all those folks worked really hard on it. Lastly, just to beat a dead horse, I know it's late, but back to Morelands Park.
Oh, my goodness.
So just bear with me for a second. So even if the city and the school district both hold hands and say, yeah, it's great for the public to come on the park any day, time of the year, and we have a legal document that says so, practically speaking, it's going to be hard for, I would say, certain demographics. So what I was hearing is that it's okay for a certain demographic to show up during the school day, namely moms with toddlers. But what if a group of 18-year-old men showed up to play pickup at the baseball diamond in the middle of the school day? Number one, would they really feel like they could do that? No. And number two, if they did, how long would they last there before they would be kicked off?
If they signed in,
Or what about two 47-year-old men walking their dogs through in the middle of the day? I just don't see it happening. Practically speaking, I don't see it happening. And so from where I'm coming from is by having, and also when there's recess, I watched recess. Those kids overwhelm the park. There's hundreds of kids and so if I was there walking my dog and suddenly I'm surrounded by hundreds of kids, I'm not feeling welcome in that park. We could have all the contracts in the world that say it's okay for me to be there, but I'm not going to feel welcome there. And so that's why I think we should come from the angle that we need to be compensated for good rent for the times that they're making it uncomfortable for the public.
I agree. Yep, that's good.
Rob, I think you're right to go after rent for when people will feel uncomfortable to go there, but I also don't think that at any point a citizen should have to go get a permission slip to be on our city property ever. You know, I don't, that's my big sticking point, is the need for, you know, a senior citizen going out for a walk, needing to walk to the office, to walk to the park. It just seems ludicrous to me. That's my sticking point personally. But if they just walk up to it and they go, I don't want to walk amongst all those kids, that's fine. But to get accosted by somebody as soon as you step on the park, that's just not right.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about 5 18-year-old young men who want to play pickup on a Thursday morning. How long is that going to last before a clash happens? But,
I really want to go park in that parking lot and have my lunch. I really want to do that.
Well, I would just comment, it's interesting, her terminology, our park, our rules don't allow on our property, neither of which are true. Yeah, so it's definitely a perception in their mind that is their land, and their laws and their go onto our property. So it's a perception that you'll just have to wrestle with. I would say, as you're arguing, so if we just say we want a fair rent, at least for the space you're using, it's not just 25% of the daylight hours, it's 700 kids 5 days a week compared to the use we are going to give it from the rest of our citizens. So they're going to put 80 to 90% of the use on that park, it feels like. You know, maybe the baseball folks will put a little more on that season, but I would negotiate not just from hours per day, but bodies running on that park per day.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, you need, there's a denominator there that you need to
I was just going to prorate by how much of the year they're using it.
No, you need to prorate by use as well. Somehow you need to say 700 kids equals however many we think we're going to put on it the rest of the year.
Well, and not only that, this time of year, if you're closed to the public during school hours, you're basically closed to the public except for weekends, because nobody's going to be hanging out at the park at 7 in the dark. And if they are, you probably don't want to be there.
Probably shouldn't, please.
Can we carry this discussion on one-on-ones and whatever?
Yeah.
Sure. Getting a little late.
We ready for council comments?
Well, just lastly,
We're still waiting on staff report.
All right.
Lastly, I just want to thank Joanne. She has been working so hard on so many things. She is producing a ton of product out of her department, and she did a phenomenal job in San Francisco last week, so I just want to publicly thank her for what a great job she's done. So
Thank you.
Thank you, John.
Thanks.
That's it.
All right, we're done.
Comments, reports. Councilmember Smith.
I had 6 things to say, but I'm going to mark it down to just one.
Say them all.
No, I'm just
kidding.
I just wanted to see your reaction.
I'd love to hear 6 things.
I enjoyed having my chauffeur, our city manager, took me to Yakima on Thursday, and we had a nice time at the Parks Commission and got to try to continue in the right direction there, and it was a good afternoon, and I think, generally speaking, it went well.
Councilmember Sperry.
Well, I have 7 things.
That's great.
Actually, I have 2. Youth art event, Arts of Kenmore, on Friday. It was well attended. They had a magician from Kenmore. Great. I mean, really good. Like, we were really impressed. Second thing was I got a sneak peek of our hangar building, and it is gorgeous. The public is going to be so pleased. The details, it's just beautiful. So I think we're all going to be real happy.
Councilmember Curtis.
I'm going to be out of town for 2 weeks, so I won't be here for the meeting on the 28th or the 5th, but I will be back. Might be jet lagging, but I will be back for the one on the 12th.
Councilmember Herbig.
Late yesterday, I landed after spending 5 days with the mayor and the deputy mayor in Pittsburgh for the National League of Cities conference. It was, as always, really interesting. Just trying to think of what happened. It was a lot to take in 5 days. I took an all-day communications boot camp, which I thought was really useful, and a class in dealing with conflict, both at the dais and across the dais, which I thought was interesting. And it's just always interesting to get together with folks from other cities who are dealing with the same sort of things that you're dealing with, and to know that A, you're not alone, and B, maybe they have some ideas that you haven't thought of to help approach things. Terry Bradshaw was one of our keynote speakers, which was interesting. Pittsburgh is a fabulous city, though. They've really turned themselves around after losing the steel industry, and it was really it was fun to see all of the love that people have for that city and all the work that's gone in to make it what I think is a pretty great city again. So, and the weather, global warming worked in our favor. It was 70 degrees on Friday, I think.
Yeah,
it was. Yeah, it was hot.
It snowed.
And then it snowed the next night. Yeah, it was bizarre, but it was a great trip. I would, again, this is the third year in a row where it's been me, the mayor, and the deputy mayor. I'd encourage anybody else who has the time and interest to look into Charlotte next year. So.
Councilmember Danuski.
Nothing to add.
So I've got 13 things.
Bet you do.
Anyway, yeah, at the board dinner there was some banter going on between the mayor of Pittsburgh on the phone, texting with Frank O'Harris. And Frank O'Harris showed up at the end of dinner and surprised her. The Immaculate Reception, famous Pittsburgh Steeler football player. So that was a treat. Huh?
What dinner was that?
The board dinner. So I was part of a panel discussion on, let me see here, improving health of kids and families. And so we talked about what we've done here with our lunch program with the kids during the summertime, what we have done with Playful Cities, and what life expectancy and health risks are in the county for different parts. Actually, Kenmore does pretty darn well with life expectancy and different diseases. I met with Dow Constantine today. We talked about ST3. We talked about what's going on December 1st, and I've asked him if he wanted to show up. So that thank you for the yellow shirts. And just a quick question for you. I was down here by City Hall today, and I'm seeing them with concrete saws and jackhammers breaking up more sidewalk at the town green.
What?
Will this concrete destruction and repouring ever stop?
It will stop, but we're holding their feet to the fire and making them produce good quality product.
That's good.
Yeah.
All right. So if there's nothing else to come before us, we're adjourned.